Well, you seem to have a better recollection than I do. What do you think we should dig out first?
Sure. I'll start with like conceding me repeating shit about sugar rockets. You know, obviously homemade fertilizer, sugar, all that stuff can be used in homemade stuff, but I haven't seen any evidence. If anything, I've seen stuff to the contrary, showing that like sweets were used for rockets. So I couldn't justify why Israel was blocking sweets from Gaza except for as like a punitive measure, and I would have to ask the Israeli government for why they were doing that. I don't have a good answer.
Well, especially since it came out that because we were all kind of learning this in real time. It came out that they had not even banned sugar, so raw sugar was, I don't want to say plentifully available, but it was available more so than cookies. And I don't even know how on earth you would go about separating the sugar out from already baked cookies. Certainly not under those
Yeah,
conditions.
I
Yeah,
I saw some contention where people were saying that like 2010 was the list that had sugar on it as a permitted item, whereas in 2009 or something like that, it was a banned item. But then I saw people basically posting sources back and forth. So I wasn't able to discern what was actually true.
yeah. I think what stuck out to me with all of that, it's not so much that people were like, okay, can we imagine a way in which this food stuff could be used offensively in some respect. I think what really stuck out to people, I think the reason why this was kind of outrageous was that in the breaking points debate, clearly neither of them had a very firm grasp on what was actually like specifically banned and why and for what length of time. Omar was speaking very loosely, kind of off the cuff. He had a recollection of cookies and similar things being banned for reasons that seemed pretty obviously to be punitive, and he was just kind of floating that as like, or do you support Israel like banning cookies from children and whatnot? And
Yeah.
Destiny was floating the idea, well, hang on, they use sugar in their rockets, right? Like this is known. They use, but I think what certainly this is what made me angry. It wasn't the fact that he was floating the idea of is it conceivable that they were using foodstuffs with sugar in it to fuel their rockets, because intuitively, if you don't understand the chemistry, it's like, okay, well, yeah, maybe that's kind of hypothetically possible, even if it's not really practical. I think what made people mad was that he leapt to a very strong and very dismissive defense of a ban on cookies, not knowing any of the facts about it specifically, at least as little as Omar did. Um, on the grounds that yes, they were obviously being used for weapons because there was obviously like a defense reason for this. Obviously, anybody who disagrees is stupid, and a whole lot of people jumped in solely on the grounds that Destiny had portrayed this as like a really obvious, strong case to make. And for me, like that's the crux of it. It's not so much that people could be sort of like mistaken or confused about like what's actually practically involved in extracting and getting and like building these rockets and getting the materials for them and whatnot. It's that there was a reflexive jump to defending pretty much anything and everything that Israel does, just out of hand, and then dismissing people who didn't and calling them crazy and anti-Semitic and whatever. Like that's gonna rub me the wrong way a lot more than just
Well,
people being mistaken
it's
about that.
it's funny you bring that up. A lot of people have dogged on Jordan Peterson, but he said that part of the reason why he was frustrated with the Destiny conversation is because in his early 20s, he Jordan Peterson had a constant desire to be correct. And he kind of realized at age 23 that he was effectively worshiping his own intellect. He actually called it like a Luciferian self worship of intellect, and that he particularly didn't like Destiny's attitude about constantly needing to be correct because he viewed it as this like Luciferian strain of worshiping your own knowledge. And that's something that I actually think needs to be taken into account. Like, are you arguing because you want to find out more about the truth of reality and you want to put combating perspectives together in order to try to like result in some better world? Or are you arguing because you want to be the most correct person in the room? And those are two definitely different motivations with different rhetorical strategies.
Um, so I guess like the immediate comment is like, okay, yeah, sure, but Destiny's also like what 36, 37, so it's like okay, but
Oh,
the
did I
part.
freeze?
Oh, did you freeze? Ah,
Hello.
there we are.
Let's- So yeah, so we were at Luciferian self-worship and also
Luciferian self worship, and well, I'll just ask you directly.
sure.
So I understand why Destiny like went ham on that. He was in a debate in front of a large audience with a hostile company, and he had to have a response. He had to be in the right. He had to look like he knew what he was talking about. Yet I get him.
Mhm.
Why did you jump on the cookie thing? What was the thought process?
I really so a lot of people were calling Destiny stupid. I think you can say a lot of things about Destiny. I don't think he's stupid. You can call him arrogant. You can say that he has a need to be correct, et cetera, et cetera. But he's not an unintelligent person. And so I think in the heat of the moment, what can happen is you can remember that you read like 3 or 4 different things. You can make a connection that feels viable in the heat of a debate, and you can, say it out loud, basically. And Mehdi Hassan was acting. I really don't like Mehdi Hassan. I used to watch some of his older stuff. I think that he is much more of an apologist for Islamic extremism that he led on, especially stuff that was shot about a decade ago. And so I don't like Mehdi Hassan. So him acting like Destiny was a total fucking idiot, rube, dipshit, dumbass who didn't belong on the platform. I don't think it's accurate. I think that given enough time and preparation and research, Destiny can throw his weight around with the best of them in these spaces. And so I basically just wanted to shit post against Mehdi Hassan. That's what was motivating me.
Against made. Oh, I see. Okay, it's Media Son. I don't know. I don't know about that last characterization. You spent how many months researching and preparing for just this style of debate, and you ended up saying that the Palestinians need to have a stake in what's going on, or else I don't know exactly where he was going with that. Um, but okay, so just to be clear, you mean Mehdi Hassan on Twitter? You don't mean, you're not referring to anybody who was on the panel? 'Cause I think it was Omar Ryan Grimm. I don't know what the lady's name is.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah,
gotcha.
Mehdi Hassan on Twitter, the former news pundit.
Okay. Um, you're arguing about 30,000 people getting bombed, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think maybe getting under Mehdi Hassan's skin is possibly like misplaced priority in this case?
No.
No,
No.
no.
I like that. No, I mean, I've been alive since the late 80s. My entire life has been one geopolitical catastrophe after the other. I don't think there's ever a time to I don't think there's ever an appropriate time to go after your political adversaries. And while you're trying to be the morally correct person, there's going to be propagandists who seize the initiative and start talking shit and start saying wild shit. So you either get in the game and you get muddy or you don't do it at all.
Okay, but getting muddy in this case, just to be clear, is jumping on board with a false statement that's in defense of people not being allowed like basic goods as a punitive measure against a population that's already poor and embattled, right?
Okay.
In the midst, by the way, of them being actively bombed, like 1 million of them have been corralled into Rafah, and they're now being rocketed. Even the United States has just admitted that they're likely uh, engaging in war crimes against them right now. It just seems to me like that's not just a neutral back and forth, left and right on the propaganda thing. That's kind of actively abetting a side that specifically wants to target civilians and is actively doing so.
Yeah, so this actually gets into probably something that's where we ended up in the conversation where we were
Yeah,
talking about cultural Christianity and the morality for violence and all that kind of stuff. I don't think that so I've seen evidence of Israel being punitive in ways that I think is disgusting. So for instance, like blowing up the university, blowing up like every civic infrastructure building that I can possibly see, running over like even recently symbolically, even though it's probably like the least important, them taking a tank and running over the Gazan sign as they're about to enter Rafah, right?
yeah.
There's no need to target this thing, and yet they seem to be doing so out of a desire for vengeance for October 7th, right? But I kind of reject a dynamic of this where you're saying they're intentionally targeting civilians. They might be targeting civilians insofar as if there's a military target and there's civilians there, they don't care if civilians get hit in the crossfire. But if you were talking about targeting civilians intentionally, you would not see 30,000 deaths. They could cause 30,000 deaths in an hour or a minute if they wanted to with their technological capabilities.
Well, here's the catch, though. If they target civilians intentionally, they're going to be immediately condemned by the international community, including the United States. But
Uh-huh.
if for example, they want to create the conditions under which Gaza empties itself of its own accord, they may, for instance, target military targets with no regard for whether there are civilians present. And in addition to this, they may characterize as a military target anybody over the age of 17. And they may, in addition to this, just, sometimes shoot civilians anyways, as they've done multiple times now with aid workers, and they've done multiple times with citizens' dwellings and whatnot. When they're cutting off electricity and water, they are definitionally targeting civilian infrastructure. They're not. This is not a directed attack on the military by any stretch of the imagination. Um, I see Brooks pointing out in my chat, and I agree with this, that Mehdi Hassan has historically been a defender of an apologist for Islamic extremism. So I think he absolutely should be called out on those grounds. I seriously question the judgment of doing apologia for an act of massacre that Israel is engaging upon as the vehicle for doing so in this particular case. Seems like it's even if it doesn't backfire as this one did, like it just seems that's sort of an intrinsically bad thing. Getting under Mehdi Hassan's skin doesn't strike me as a worthy priority in this case.
Sure. Well, let's talk about okay. So,
Yeah,
I mean, if you let's figure out what we're talking about.
sure.
So, we can talk about the dynamics of the conflict that are currently at play, who we think is as justified as possible, or at least following their own logic, and then, how we perceive this conflict differently. That's one avenue of approach. The other avenue of approach that you've brought up a couple of times is that you don't view me criticizing Mehdi Hassan as a worthwhile venture of my time and energy because I'm doing so in the backdrop of 30,000 dead people. So I'm prioritizing
No,
internet dunks against a dumbass
no,
versus the violence.
no.
Okay,
That's not what I'm
I'm
saying.
listening.
What I'm saying very specifically is that what you're justifying by saying it gets under Mehdi Hassan's skin and it gets at him is
Mhm.
is repeating propaganda that is justifying cruelty to a civilian population that is being actively bombed. Slight
Okay.
difference, but important difference. I'm not saying that
No,
it's
that makes
because
the
it's
violence
unworthy.
more for. Yeah, that makes the violence
Yeah,
more to the fore. Yeah, so let's get into the violence. So we were having this conversation on a panel, but you didn't seem particularly interested. The I was talking about what was going to happen,
right.
whether we like it or not, and what is justifiable from an Israeli military perspective, which is they are going to go into Rafah, they are going to clear out all of Gaza, they are going to kill every military aged male that throws a rock at them, they're going to shoot them. And then they're going to try to dismantle Hamas infrastructure as much as possible. And if they happen to hurt or
Do you
kill
think
civilians, that's what's going to
before you
happen.
continue, do you think that's an accurate description of the majority of the targets that they claim to have hit that were military? Do you think they've 15,000 of them were throwing rocks at them?
Ooh, I don't know. I'm not on the ground, but in
Okay.
asymmetric warfare, I'm assuming that Hamas's military capability is probably a few dudes with propelled grenades and AK-47s. I don't think they're rolling around in tanks or technicals or dushkas or anti-aircraft. I think it's basically dudes in flip-flops with AKs. Even when you're talking about a military target.
Right, okay, but when you're talking specifically about what will happen and you're saying that they will target any single person who fires any sort of ordnance of whatever Stone Age or up, right?
Yeah.
That suggests to me that what you're saying is that what Israel will do is they will specifically target military personnel, but it doesn't seem like they're doing that. It seems like the death toll is far in excess of what could possibly be the case if they're doing that, because it's in excess so far of Hamas's numbers.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, this is kind of the unfortunately, this is like the nature of warfare. The if you look at death tolls for any major conflict in the past century, The civilian deaths are probably going to exceed the military deaths, and it's probably going to be a factor of like 5 or 10 to 1.
This is
Even with our own bombing campaign, even with the drone strikes.
yeah, so the ratio here, let's see. I don't actually think that the rates we're seeing are accurate to this, but moreover, there's a couple of problems here. First and foremost, because all infrastructure has been taken out, there isn't really the capacity to count the dead anymore. So the number is possibly significantly higher than we think. Following from that, the total displacement of the population is a different military outcome than the defeat of an enemy in the field. So what happens when you displace 2 million people from Israel? Like, what happens to those people?
Yeah, they starve, they're undernourished, they're not
Yeah.
educated, they're deprived of normal things, they
Well,
might get
educated's probably
infected,
being
bacteria
optimistic.
disease,
Like,
cholera. Yeah.
yeah. So you're not talking about even the ratio you've given anymore. You're potentially talking about significantly more than have currently died and are going to continue to die for an extended period of time. And in the process of this, you're going to swell Hamas's ranks as well, right? So
Well, I mean there's a way around swelling Hamas's ranks, and you can go super Iron Age on it if you want, but that's like,
how's that?
what are we trying to accomplish? Well, I mean, if so this is I'm not saying this is a justifiable public policy,
Right.
okay? I'm
Yeah.
not saying that. I'm saying that this is a realism of having a professional military force that outclasses its opponents by a technological factor of who knows even how to calculate. You could walk into Gaza and probably kill every male from 10 to 70, and then there's no militants to come in. Egypt is blocking the border, Iran's blocking the border. No one's getting in. So then at that point, how are you swelling Hamas's ranks? Unless you're talking about like international recruiting for jihadist terrorism against Israel as a result.
I think it's probably a bit harder than you're imagining it. Um, I'm not even sure where to go here, to be honest. So let me see if I get this straight. So there is no capacity for the international community to exert pressure on Israel, which is using American weapons and funds to ethnically cleanse all of Gaza, which you agree is taking place. Um, and you're jumping on to defend apologia for the previous blockade that precipitated a massacre of civilians protesting the blockade to get under Mehdi Hassan's skin. Like, I'm sorry, like the pictures being painted in my head here is there's just no concern or conscience for the civilians that are being killed at all. It just doesn't occur. You see what
Yeah.
I'm saying?
The
Like, yeah.
No, I mean, I kind of I agree that it's a sociopathic calculus of what's going on. This is the calculus of war. So it's horrifying.
But it's really
That
it's
that's
really not though. Like
Mhm.
the reason for October 7th in the first place was because Hamas was
Mhm.
fostered. There was decades and decades of brutalization and starvation of the population that gave them that swelled their ranks. There's no political hope to do anything productive, like nationalistically, to have like engagement diplomatically with Israel to actually build up infrastructure and things like that. And that's by design. That's not a calculus of war. That's a cynical, and that seems to me like a cynical and short-sighted attempt to do a maneuver to keep a population under your thumb that backfired because of how stupid and short-sighted it was, that resulted in the deaths of over 1,000 Israelis.
Well, see, here's the thing. So, what does Israel want? And when we say Israel, we're talking about like half a dozen to a dozen factions, right? What does the Netanyahu government want? And what I would say, what they want, because I've talked to a healthy chunk of left wing Israelis who want the war to end and basically want a two-state solution. And I've also talked to single-state solution Israelis who basically said, no, this is the slow march of Israel where we are going to take the West Bank. We are going to take Gaza. It's for our own security. The geography demands it. The population
The
trends
geography
demand
demands it.
it.
Elaborate.
Yeah, so in the West Bank, I have repeated, because obviously I'm a American centrist, so I don't understand why people have to kill each other over this shit. But I have repeated said, hey, draw the borders at 67 or 2010 or whatever the fuck will get people to chill the fuck out, and then make the West Bank Palestinian, make Gaza Palestinian, and then just chill with what you got, hold what you got, right? And then help like do an international aid package to get development in the West Bank and in Gaza to the point that you dump in billions of dollars in water, food, infrastructure, education, opportunities for employment, et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully within like 2 or 3 generations, these people, they don't even give a fuck about the border dispute anymore because everybody's wealthy and doing well. That's what I've said. What the Israeli said is, we've kind of tried to do that in the past. They screwed us over. And the reason why we keep doing settlements into the West Bank is because if you look at the geography, it's actually hills and mountains. So if we just give that to the Palestinians, then the first opportunity they get, they're going to shoot rockets and missiles and gunfire down into the Israeli settlements. And that's happened repeatedly. So it's real last point of the rant. So it's easy for you as an American to say, why can't we all just get along and let's do economic development? But for us, these are the neighborhoods we're walking in that are getting shot and rocketed. So we don't accept this as
Oh, I
easily
see.
as you
So
do.
so as you imagine it, there's bare hills that are unsettled, but if they settle them, they'll set up rockets and launch them down to the settlements.
No, the Palestinians will use the Bear Hills. The settlements from Israelis are preventing through territorial proximity rockets and gunfire coming down into eastern Israel.
Right, but you seem to be speaking as if the hills aren't settled, right?
I mean, allegedly they aren't.
Okay. Why are they bulldozing houses that are already established? Like why are they kicking families out of their houses and just bulldozing them, just running through neighborhoods and flattening them?
If you're trying to, I mean, I can just go ahead and come all the way your way. If
Yeah.
you're saying that Israel is putting Palestinians in an impossible position, then acting surprised when Palestinians, do something crazy like rise up, suicide bombing, shooting, stabbing, whatever, and then they use that as a pretext to expand their territory, I'm already with you. I don't disagree with you.
Well, sure. I'm just trying to understand the military logic of this because if you're trying to
Uh-huh.
prevent like an additional development, which would seem to be the problem, um, then okay, I can kind of see the logic there. You want to fill a high zone. I get what you're saying. You want to fill a high zone with structures so that there is no room for a rocket launcher to be put. Now, that's odd for a couple of reasons. Mostly because they're firing rockets out of Gaza already. I don't think they are in particular need of a hill to do this. Moreover, their weaponry is small and mobile, sort of by design and whatnot. Um, but kind of leaving that aside, uh, that would sort of explain, to my mind, kind of a naive reason to really want to take those hills, assuming they're not occupied already. But I don't know why you would bulldoze the houses that aren't on the hills. I don't know why you would go into valleys and roads and neighborhoods and flatten them and set a whole bunch of like
Because
military age
it's a
men
hun
loose.
because it's
You know?
well, you do know, don't you? Like you do know, and I know, like, why they're doing it. It's because Israel's doing a slow crawl to claim the West Bank and to claim Gaza, and
Yeah.
they got time. And oftentimes, the diplomacy that any right winger Israeli uses seems like a smokescreen for them to, feign disdain at the last second for the talks to fall apart. And then once the talks fall apart, then they use that as a pretext to gain more territory. That's what's going on. It's
Right.
the slow crawl. And then not only that, geopolitically, this seems almost more certain now that more Arab countries are normalizing relations with Israel.
Well, I mean, that becomes a little bit dicey though, because as a consequence of what Israel's doing, this brings us back to the not being able to find Israel on a map thing and why that's kind of important. If you displace 2 million people, that creates an insurgency risk for every neighboring country. That's not just an Israeli problem anymore. This is straining relations with multiple of Israel's neighbors. It's straining relations with the United States. There's mass protests within Israel itself. Um, there's the ongoing possibility of war with Iran and escalating things with the insurgencies that Iran funds. So um, I'm I just don't see it. It seems to me like it's the whole thing's kind of ass backwards. It seems like there's a radical desire within the Likud party in particular to squeeze out the Palestinians entirely and to make Israel like just completely uh, monoethnic to the extent possible. Um, Forget democracy, forget the actual will of the Israeli people, and forget as well like any particular concern for international security or the actual stability of its relations with its neighbors. Like nobody in the vicinity of Israel wants 2 million people on their doorstep that are all traumatized, radicalized, starving, etc., etc. This has not just been like a danger for them locally. This is the basis of Hezbollah coming into existence. This has also uh, acted as a pretext for Israel to invade neighboring countries. You have terrorist organizations that are now establishing themselves where they've become refugees, and then they come back. Um, like it just seems like the most self-destructive move you could have possibly made under these conditions, and it's also lost. It's lost Israel. Like after having an outpouring of global sympathy after October 7th, it's lost Israel its standing in the eyes of a massive part of the world. We have a conservative on this channel right now who's been defending the cookie thing. Even you're like flat out saying, yeah, they just hate the Palestinians, want to ethnically cleanse them. Not actually very true of Israelis across the board, by the way, but um, I don't know. Like
Yeah, I
it's
think it's
yeah,
a, but I don't. But here's the thing is like I don't look at just what people say. I'm also looking at what they're doing, right?
right.
And so what I would say is if we saw a leftward swing in Israeli electoral politics where they were like, hey, October 7th was fucked up, but we were partially responsible. Therefore, rebuilding Gaza and treating Gazans as decent human beings, and making sure that we come to some kind of territorial concession with the Palestinian Authority and probably whatever replaces Hamas, and also that we come to something that makes sense in the West Bank and we freeze what we got so we can get along with everybody. If I saw that, then maybe I would be more sympathetic to the possibility that this is like a diplomatic solution was real. However, what I see is similar to 9/11 and the ensuing wars then. Iraq was unpopular as a conflict within 2005. I think that Afghanistan, nobody really cared about even up until we withdrew.
Really?
And
You
so,
think nobody cared about
yeah,
Afghanistan?
well, I mean, they didn't care enough to get it done. They didn't care enough to withdraw for what, 2 decades? If we cared, we would have been gone, but we weren't. We used 9/11 as a pretext to stay there for 2 decades. So what do you think how much good international goodwill do you think Israel is willing to burn
Well, I
in
think
order to get their mission quote unquote accomplished?
okay. Well, here's the problem with Afghanistan. Okay, you go
Uh-huh.
into Afghanistan, you break down the local government or whatever, and now you leave a massive power vacuum that's going to be filled by a whole bunch of different warlords who have funding from different people. You don't want to have a foothold in the region. I don't think it's because we didn't care. This was like a major political issue for that entire 2 decades. It's why ultimately like they did retreat at all in the first place. Um, I I think the bare fact that they left is points to it being a massive deal. Um, I I don't know. I also you said it's normalizing relations between Israel and its neighbors. That's not what I'm seeing at all. I know Saudi relations have been severely
No, I
strained.
would say up until October 7th, relations were normalizing.
I think probably be closer to say up until the massacre began. Certainly up until
Sure.
this point.
Okay. And
Yeah.
do you see any broad statements from Arab nation saying that they not only do they condemn Israel, but they're willing to like militarily and diplomatically commit to the rebuilding of Gaza and the West Bank.
Willing to diplomatically commit to the rebuilding of Gaza and the West Bank. That'd be a strange statement for them to make. But there have, for example, in Egypt, been government-sanctioned protests of a massive scale against Israel. Egypt is far more normalized with Israel than Saudi Arabia is. It's actually a very there's tension between the rulers of Arab states and their people because they all have independent treaties with Israel, but the people themselves largely despise it, and they're very uneasy. It's a massively destabilizing element in the region.
I mean, I don't disagree with anything that you've just said. I
Yeah.
just don't know if it's enough to do anything about.
Enough to do anything. What do you mean? Enough to do anything about?
So
Yeah.
you brought up like tens of thousands of people taken to the streets in Egypt in
Yeah.
order to protest what's going on between Israel and Gaza. Okay? And the government says, "Yes, please take to the street. Israel is fucking up. I can't believe that they're doing all this crazy shit. They're killing civilians. It's so fucked up." Is Egypt opening the border? Are they delivering humanitarian aid? Are they giving weapons to Hamas? Are they doing any of that kind of shit? Are any of the protesters doing any of that kind of shit? Because largely my answer would be no. I've seen
No.
no reports of thousands of Egyptians walking across the border or going into the Sinai to go actively help the Gazans or Hamas or any of that shit.
Well, it's
I've
not
also
really.
seen no intervention from Egyptian military.
Well, it's
If
not.
anything, I've seen the opposite.
Well, it's not really how that would work. The concern would be that this creates a wave of very severe resentment that eventually culminates in somebody coming to power who does decide to take a very firm or a radically divergent stance vis-a-vis Israel than what happened before. And we've seen this happen in a few countries already. The Arab Spring is a case in point. That's an extreme case in point.
But I would say the Arab Spring has largely been co-opted by Western interest.
Elaborate.
So you had the Muslim Brotherhood who came in on the heels of the Arab Spring. You had like
Yeah.
Tunisia that had a revolt. You had Libya that also had Muammar Gaddafi who was anti-Western. So Tunisia, they had their revolution. I haven't heard shit about Tunisia in the past like decade. Libya has been basically a defunct state for the past decade. The Egyptians, the Muslim Brotherhood, got taken out by if I remember correct, like a military coup d'état. They said that it was democratic, but who knows whether or not there was any kind of democracy related at all. And so they got ousted. Bashir al-Assad survived by the skin of his teeth. Basically had to destroy his whole country in order to remain in power. So yeah, I would say the alignment is still wildly destructive and probably horribly resentful of the West, but the governments that are in place are still Western or pro-Western.
Well, the governments that weren't overthrown are some. I don't know about that, dude. You guys almost
Egypt,
if Hillary,
Saudi Arabia.
If Hillary was president, it's a possibility that you guys would have been in a direct conflict with Russia right now over Syria.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm not saying the co-opting of the Arab Spring by the West here. I'm saying, well, some of the tyrants who remain have an economic disposition towards cooperation overall, as opposed to hostility. That's not a co-opting.
Well, that's the power of mixed economy capitalism
Like
and liberal hegemony.
Is ISIS,
you don't have to like them.
Is ISIS like exploding to the benefit of? I'm just not seeing this.
Well, ISIS exploding wasn't to the benefit of anybody, but it's also been taken out largely.
Okay. I think you just kind of fried my brain here.
I'll wait.
Yeah, ISIS has not been taken out, by the way. I don't know if you know this, but they attacked a music hall in Russia recently. But
hold on. So let's qualify our statements.
Sure.
ISIS owned half of Iraq, Western Iraq, and owned a healthy chunk of Eastern Syria. I don't know if they have any territorial claims.
Well, you have to be careful with that, because the way ISIS works, it's not like the Taliban, where it actually occupies a role in government. Their attitude towards government has been more or less to entirely neglect it. Their modus operandi is to collect men, offer them wages given them by foreign donors, and then to do things that encourage more donations. They're called the
Well, they
Islamic
were
State,
a
but they have very
little,
little state-like about them, right?
well,
They're borderline a
now,
mercenary army.
now, but
Well,
from
no,
2010 to
always.
2014,
Yeah,
no, that's not
yeah,
correct.
yeah.
They called themselves the Caliphate.
Doesn't matter.
They were trying to create. Hold on. Now you're being confident about something that I think you're incorrect on, so I'm going to expand.
It's
So
just been a mild
during
interest lately. So
okay, well you can tell me what's inside the book as soon as I'm done with my rant.
okay,
From 2010 to 2014, they took a healthy chunk of eastern Iraq, or excuse me, western Iraq, and then they also took a healthy chunk of eastern Syria. They controlled territory and they controlled oil pipelines, and they traded it with the neighboring states. They were looking for recognition, and they claimed to be the Ummah. They claimed to be the foundation of the glorious Islamic Caliphate, come back anew in order to chase the Western devils outside of the Middle East and North Africa. And a healthy chunk, tens of thousands of people, traveled to the Islamic State of Syria, the name, and then they lived there and they governed there and
okay.
they ran the people there and they ran the economy there. So how is that not them claiming territory?
Okay. Follow me for a little bit.
I will.
The is North Korea a democracy?
No.
No, but they're called a democracy.
Okay. Did the Islamic State claim nationhood and territory and govern?
Did they claim nation and territory and govern? Well, that's a little bit tricky because they didn't actually have any state function. They didn't provide services. They didn't provide governance. They had no interaction with the people. They moved in like a gang, basically extracted money and resources from whatever industries they took over, traded it illicitly with smuggling, and then just did their own thing. That's not a state. That's a roving war band. Like, is the LRA a state?
Well, no offense, but no offense to the governments of the Middle East and North Africa, but there were plenty of people in Western Iraq who didn't see the ISIS much different than they saw the central government. And also,
Ooh,
I
that's not
don't
true.
know.
That's not true at all.
Yes, they did. Otherwise, why didn't they fight them?
Why didn't they fight them? Do you know what ISIS does to people who fight them? How do you fight
It's
ISIS
not
as
any
like a
worse
as like
than
a
when you
civilian?
surrender.
Oh, it's significantly worse. You fight ISIS. You
Fighting ISIS is significantly worse than surrendering. Do you know what happened after the people surrendered?
no, you're not.
I
You're
mean,
not
we can pull up Live Leak if you
no,
want.
but you're not following here.
Uh-huh.
Civilians are not
Uh-huh.
going to start fighting ISIS, and civilians who are not in conflict with ISIS don't have to surrender because ISIS isn't interested in just killing all of the people. They're interested
Uh-huh.
in money.
So, okay, so I'm going to rephrase my question. I think you'll
Yes.
probably be able to answer it.
Okay.
So, what happened to the cops and military members who stayed behind in ISIS controlled territory and surrendered to ISIS, but they had previously been friendly to the central government?
Depending on who you're talking about, some of them were co-opted, some of them were killed.
A shitload of them were
A
killed.
shitload of them were killed. Yeah. A
Yeah.
lot of them were co-opted,
So I
by
would
the way.
say,
Like, for example,
okay.
in Iraq, for instance, there is there is strong speculation that a major turn in their sort of strategic approach was the result of Ba'athist officers being absorbed into their ranks. So it's both.
Okay. I'm not sure if we're far enough away from each other that we have to turn it into a contention. But I would say, this is my assertion. You don't have to agree with it. I would say that ISIS had territorial ambitions. They didn't fulfill those territorial ambitions largely because of a joint multinational effort in the response to the Bataclan attacks and response to the Marseille attacks in 2016. It took a shitload of ordnance. It took coordination with Shiite militias and Iraq's primarily Shiite government. It took us cooling off on Syria in order to largely destroy the territorial ambitions of ISIS. That's my assertion.
Okay, but they didn't govern. They weren't a state. Like they just didn't operate like a state. This is kind of
Okay.
known. Like their internal structure was
I
not
disagree.
like they had
They had
zero interest in it. Like,
Okay, I disagree. They had city council members, they had mayors, they had people who administered the local economy, they had people who ran the oil outside of their own territory. I completely disagree. This is like saying the Taliban was not a state.
no, the Taliban is actually very specifically distinct from ISIS. The Taliban actually had a much more textured structure than ISIS did. This has been noted by people who study both.
Okay.
Yeah,
I would say
ISIS
that
was
ISIS's territorial
yeah.
ambitions were thwarted through intentional military effort.
Uh, sure,
Okay.
but okay, but how do you get from here to the Arab Spring is co-opted by the West, and that therefore the settling of the West Bank
Is probably going to continue without significant action by Arab states?
Probably, yeah. I just don't.
Yeah.
Okay, but why is that pertinent?
Why is Western influence in the Middle East and North Africa pertinent to Arab states not acting against Israel with their current action?
No, why is Arab states not interfering with the massacre of Gaza? Why
I
is
would
that?
say largely Western influence.
No, but why is that pertinent to a discussion of why you would jump to the defense of propaganda justifying brutalizing the Palestinians over here while this is all going on?
Okay, because yeah, so let's get into the morality of conflict, which I think was what we were originally talking about.
Okay.
So if we're talking about resistance, I do not agree with the assertion that there's like no bad tactics, only bad targets. I don't agree with that at all. I don't think that asymmetric warfare or even terrorism demands that you target civilians, demands the rape of women, demands beheadings, demands all of that.
Uh-huh.
And I think that some of these organizations, like Hamas, openly celebrated the fact and how brutal they were on October 7th. As a result, they're not going to be tolerated as a militaristic political entity on Israel's border. So, if that's the case, then there's really only one option here. Israel is going to militarily take Gaza and eradicate as much of Hamas as possible through military means. If civilians are going to get killed, then they're going to get killed. And so what's going to happen here is after that is kind of what's important. But Israel has the right to do this. And if anything, compared to,
What do you mean?
I would say
What
50 or 70 years ago.
What do you mean Israel has the right to do this? What are you saying specifically when you say that?
So if you have a government, a neighboring government that sanctions the slaughter of everyone in your nation state, and then they do so, you do not have to tolerate that person on your border.
Okay, so to be clear, your argument then is that the Palestinians do not have to tolerate Israel on their border, right?
I don't see the violence taken by Israel as the same as the violence done by Hamas.
Well, let me give you an example. So, in the lead up to the 1948 war, for instance, Haganah soldiers went door to door with orders to kill the maximal number of adult males possible, opened the doors, pulled up the men, shot them, and or opened the doors, threw in a grenade, and sprayed them with bullets.
Yeah,
they bombed buses.
Are you expecting me to say something else?
Well, it seems like if we go off, for example, Benny Morris's history of this, which suggests that in fact the Palestinians learned terrorism from Israel, everything that you're saying is a perverse justification that I disavow, by the way, for the excesses that Hamas is taking in response to Israel. Right?
Well, hold on. So let's isolate something and then we can move to the next position. So if Israel is moving door to door and executing men, women, and children and indiscriminately throwing explosives into homes,
yes,
do the people who are suffering that have the right to resist with violence? 100%. And what fucking psycho would say otherwise?
Well, who do you think Hamas recruits from?
I mean, they recruit from pissed off Gazans and pissed off West Bankers and Palestinians
Well,
and probably international
West
Arabs as
Bankers
well.
and Gazans whose families and livelihoods have been destroyed, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Does that give you the right to chop off a Malaysian dude's head with a backhoe?
Well, I don't know, dude. You're the one who's saying that it justifies what Israel's doing to Gaza. Have you seen the photos of the 10-year-old children with their eyeballs popping out of their skulls crushed by cinder block?
Yeah, because they're getting hit by military ordnance because Israel is taking out Hamas.
But they're not taking out Hamas. Hamas's leadership is in
Yeah.
Qatar, Connor. Hamas is going to
Yeah,
survive
and
this
I
just
think
fine.
Qatar is fucking up, by the way.
But what does that have to do with the question at hand? If they're displacing millions of people on the basis of ethnic cleansing, we're not talking about like a military response based upon right. We're just talking about the bare fact that they have the power to do so. If you want to talk about right in the sense of you have a reciprocal right to reply in kind in your defense, well, that doesn't really work for you either, because Israel and Britain and the United States aggressed on the Palestinians first. And not against, by the way, the Palestinians as a united entity, just Palestinians generally, Arabs. One of the things that happened very frequently is that in retaliation for the terrorist acts of some individuals here, identity is not actually determined. They would just blow up people nearby. Sometimes they were even like not even Muslims. They would. Sorry?
You're gonna have to repeat that sentence. What?
It would frequently be the case that in retaliation for terrorist action by someone who isn't even fully identified, if they couldn't, they would blow up the house of somebody nearby, or they would assault travelers on a road nearby, not even bothering to figure out who it was who was guilty.
Yeah, it's called a death blossom. So let's talk about war.
Okay.
Yeah, it's called a death blossom. So what happened? So actually, I'll describe that because it's
I'm not
actually
familiar with that term.
It's interesting to me, anyways. So let's say that
that's a Warhammer thing.
No. This is actually a military thing. I knew about this way before I knew Warhammer. So all right, so death blossom. So imagine a patrol. They're actually the stem of the flower. They're walking up. They are creating the stem by going on a patrol route. And then what happens is you feel that the room's getting pretty fucking ugly. People are mean mugging you. They're staring at you. Kids are fucking, going inside, et cetera, et cetera. You start to get an itchy trigger finger because you think shit's about to pop off. A sniper fucking hits one of your guys inside the patrol. And what happens is instead of identifying where the sniper is, out of adrenaline and fear and anxiety, what happens is the patrol guns down any human being within 25 or 50 yards.
No. See, that's a mistake. So I'm not talking about them spraying indiscriminately in the direction of fire or around themselves when they're under fire. I'm talking about planting bombs.
Planting bombs. Can you elaborate?
Planting bombs in local houses. Planting bombs under buses. Throwing bombs at buses. The kinds of things that you don't do on impulse. The kinds of things you plan.
So hold on. I want to make sure that I'm understanding your contention, because I would absolutely not permit it in any kind of shape or form.
Sure.
You're saying that. So are we talking about Israeli civilians? Are we talking about IDF? Who are we talking about?
I'll give you a quote here if you'll indulge me.
Sure.
Yeah. So attacks on Jewish rural settlements. This is Benny Morris, Righteous Victims. 2 paragraphs, if you'll bear with me for a moment. Attacks on Jewish rural settlements also began in early December 1947, generally resulting in the Arabs being beaten off, sometimes with British assistance. This was an army of irregulars that was not representative in Benny Morris's language. The largest raid took place on January 9th, 1948, when more than 300 Arabs, mostly Syrian Bedouins, stormed the frontier kibbutz of Kfar Sold, probably in response to a Palma raid of December 18th on nearby Kisas. The local British battalion commander sent 8 armored cars to help the defenders, and the Arabs were driven off. In Tel Aviv, Jaffa, Haifa, and Jerusalem in December and early January 1948, hundreds of Arab civilians were killed or wounded by Irgun terror. In Jerusalem alone, 37 Arabs were killed and 80 wounded in 2 bombings on December 13th and 29th. Another such operation set in motion one of the bloodiest, most vicious cycles of terror and retaliation of the period. On December 30th, an Irgun squad threw a number of bombs into a crowd at a bus stop outside the Haifa oil refinery, killing 6 people and wounding dozens more. In a spontaneous response, the Arab workers in the refinery turned on their Jewish co-workers with hammers, chisels, stones, and clubs, massacring 39 of them and wounding another 50 before British forces intervened. The Haganah General Staff felt that the massacre could not go unanswered, whatever its causes. On the night of December 31st, the suburban villages of Balad ash-Sheikh and Hawassa, southeast of Haifa, where many of the Arab refining workers lived, were raided by Palma and Haganah units. The order was to kill a maximal number of adult males, destroy furniture, etc., but to avoid killing women and children. The raiders moved from house to house, pulling men out and executing them. Sometimes they simply threw grenades into houses and sprayed the interior with automatic fire. The villagers suffered more than 60 dead, some of them women and children. In Hawassa, 16 men were killed and 10 wounded. And then there's an example here that stuck with me. I think it's right here. A major raid took place on December 18th against the village of Kissas in Upper Galilee. Kissas. Not Kissas, Kissas. A Jewish guard had shot dead an Arab from Hissas. The British arrested him, and the villagers began to snipe at Jews in nearby fields. Then Arabs ambushed and killed a cart driver near Kibbutz Mayan Baruch. That night, the Palma raided Kissas and a large nearby house, the palace, belonging to the main Arab landowner in the era, the Emir Faour. In Kissas, the Palmanics blew up a house and killed 3 men, a woman, and 4 children. At the palace, they killed 4 men. These were unrelated people. This wasn't a death blossom. This was
ethno-religious. Yeah, it's ethno-religious tit for tat murder.
But it's not tit for tat murder. See, because the Palestinians were defined at this time by their disunity. They were not an entity. The Palestinians were not Palestine. They were just Arabs occupying Palestine. They were different tribes. Some of them even helped Israel fight the insurgents that were fighting that war.
I mean, that's still true today. Yeah.
That is still true today. But the point I'm getting at here is, if you're going to argue that the violence of Hamas justifies what Israel is doing to the Palestinian Arabs, well, you've got a bit of trouble here, because what Hamas is doing is consistent with what Israel has done for a very long time to the Palestinian people. Their identity as a single unity is directly the result of them being attacked as a single entity. That's the only reason why it exists as such. They were disparate tribes that feuded with each other before.
Sure. Yeah. So I think there's a reason. I think there's partially a reason why you're going back to 47 and 48. And I think there's a reason why you're going to see an evolution in tactics and technology over the past 80 years in particular.
Well, I'm going back to 47 and 48, to be clear, solely on the grounds that I'm reading about it actively right now. I could go back to precisely the protests that Destiny was defending, the mowing down of people at the Green Line. I could be going to.
Well, why don't you do that while we're here?
Beg your pardon?
So while we're here, what happened to the mowing down of the people at the Green Line? Tell me about it.
The mowing down of the people of the Green Line?
Or the protest.
Yeah, you had people protesting at a fence a few hundred feet away. Some of them moved closer, and they were protesting the blockading of the port, which included, for example, things like toilet paper and books, things we agree were punitive. In reaction to people.
And I'm sorry, what year is this?
This would have been in 2011, I think. Hang on.
Okay.
Give me a sec. Let me pull it up. My timeline's fuzzy. My head's back in the 40s right now.
Honestly, if you put me in the aughts or the tens, I know that there was some fucking intifada bullshit around there, and the Israelis are going to have some justification for it. But you can hit me with what happened.
This is the what is it called again? Chat, help me. March of Return. Thank you. Lost it. That's 2014. Okay. My bad. Not 2013. 2014. Wait, 2018. What am I thinking of 2014? Shit. 2018. Sorry, the 2018 March of Return. This is much more recent.
You could throw a rock and hit any year, and you're going to bounce into some fucked up violence. So if you just want to describe this, and I'll take generally that it's happened sometime in the past 20 years, I'll give you that parity.
Okay. Well, I mean, this is a protest action, so this is a little bit different. But you had protesters who were protesting the blockade of Gaza, which was destroying the economy of the place, among other things. Mm-hmm. And you had something to the tune of like 13,000 people wounded by Israeli arms. You had 1,400 killed. You had people in wheelchairs being shot. You had aid workers being shot, etc. I think the grand total of Israeli injured was 1, no deaths. This was simply a massacre of civilians.
Right? Yeah. So can I walk you? Well, so let me just infer from what you're saying, And the instead of making excuses for things,
Mhm.
let me take your inference and then let me say why I might doubt it. So 1400, so one injured Israeli, 1400 dead, and then 13,000 injured. Did I hear that correct?
March of return casualties. Let me get the exact number here, just so we're so
Sure.
214 Palestinians were killed, 1,400 were shot. So 1,400 had bullets in them. 3,600 were injured.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me tell you what I've heard from Israelis. Is and I'm not saying in specifics in reference to this thing. This is just something that colors my view. So, what happens is Israel has these barricades. They have them in the West Bank and they have them with Gaza, right?
Right.
They're chain link, they're concertina wire, sometimes they're cement blockades, whatever. But what happens is unarmed Palestinians will walk up to them and try to break down the barricades. This is obviously a security issue. They're not going to let them do it. So what they do, what an Israeli security guy told me, is that they have 22 rifles, so 22 caliber, semi-automatic rifles instead of the normal 5.56 or 308 or whatever rounds that they would typically use in the military thing, right? And so whenever the Palestinians will reach down in order to grab a barricade, they will effectively shoot them in the calf with 22 rounds and then have them get carted off.
There were
And so
eight.
what
There were
they'll literally
8,000 hit
just
by live ammunition.
yeah, 22 is still live ammunition, right?
Well, no,
So
I know, but
it could
I'm
still
telling you,
kill you. It could
Oh no,
hit an
no, of course,
artery
but
and
I'm
it could
telling
kill
you,
you.
no. What I'm drawing your attention to is not that it's live
Uh-huh.
ammunition. What I'm drawing your attention to is the 8,000. 8,000 people were not lifting up the barricades
How would you know that based off of them being wounded with live ammunition? I'm missing the inference.
because a lot of them were wounded with live ammunition without even being in proximity of the fence.
How do you know that?
Well, we know this. There were 8,000 shot. There were not 8,000 at a fence in a brawl with the Israeli guard. That's why only one Israeli was hurt. We also
How
know
long
that
was
they.
this event?
What's that?
How long was this event, this
It
riot, this
was
March of
it
Return
was
or
over a
protest or whatever you
period of
want to call
a
it?
few months.
So you think in a few months you couldn't have 8,000 people shot with various calibers that ended up wounding them and not killing them?
Well, most of the protests were peaceful.
Okay, and
This is the UN's judgment on this. Well, 8,000 people were not suddenly against the fence brawling with the IDF, and moreover,
well, I don't even think they're brawling. I think they probably were sniped in a certain way.
right?
So if you had
Okay,
people
so
who
just
were
just to
standing
be
by the fence,
so just
uh-huh,
to bring this back to the reason why we're having this discussion in the first place. So remember, the
sure.
argument that you made is that for its own defense, a state has full justification in waging extreme levels of violence against a population that is threatening it, right? That is threatening
Yep.
its territory. Okay. So,
Yep.
right. So Israel was founded on that kind of terrorist violence. That is precisely the kind of thing that made them make their initial land grabs to take from the Palestinians in the first place. There have been multiple massacre actions by the Israeli state since then against them. But for some reason, on the grounds of there being an armistice line that was established with Egypt, the Palestinians approaching a fence, your justification lies solely like that. You will give the justification to the Israeli side for them approaching a fence and shooting 8,000 of them with live ammunition. Why? It seems to me like you
I would
have
extend the same to the Palestinians, by the way. But sorry, you're asking a question.
well,
Continue.
but if you would extend the same to the Palestinians, then we're not talking about right anymore. Now we're just talking about we're just sort of agreeing that
Borders?
they're at odds with each other, right?
No, we're talking about borders and enforcement in nation states. That's what we're talking about. So if the Palestinians said, "Hey Israel, you fucked us over a whole bunch of times, and on top of that, we lost a dickload of territory because we kept fighting wars against you and losing, and we have massacres on both sides. However, we feel like we've lost enough territory. Therefore, we want to claim this territory specifically as our sovereign. We want the United States and the United Nations in order to recognize these specific borders. And as a result, we will stop attacking you past these borders, but we are going to enforce those. And then let's say that a bunch of settlers, let's say 1,400 settlers or 2,000 settlers or whatever, said, this is greater Israel. This is our territory. We are going to take it. And they started breaking through Gazan fence or West Bank fence and concertina wire,
Yeah.
and they were unarmed, then I would absolutely extend the right to the Palestinian Authority or Hamas, if they were still in power, to use as minimum force as possible, but up to and including lethal force in order to enforce their border. And if 200 Israeli settlers broke into Palestine in order to try to take territory that wasn't theirs, I wouldn't give a solitary fuck.
Okay, so the funny thing about that is that that's exactly what happened.
How so? Are you talking about the illegal settlements?
I'm talking about the illegal settlements. I'm talking about the bombing and the illegal land grab of Gaza. I'm talking about the illegal land grabs and the killing of Palestinian civilians that has been going on for decades and decades and decades. Like this
well,
is this
correct
has
me if
happened.
I'm wrong. Have the Palestinians ever agreed to live Israel in peace with specific borders?
Have the Palestinians agreed to live in peace with Israel with specific borders?
Yeah.
It depends on what you mean. There's been a consistent desire for a state, but they've never been offered that.
Correct me if I'm wrong. It wasn't that the entirety of the Camp David Accords?
Well, really,
wasn't that the 48 negotiations of territory?
Well, let me quiz you a little bit. As in the proposals of, actually, we'll simplify this. Name me one proposal that Israel has agreed to that gives Palestine control over its diplomacy, its airspace, its borders, its military, or its water.
Okay, hold on. Let me write them down.
Diplomacy?
And I mean, I already know how you're answering. The answer is no, but
yes.
Let me just write down the tiers. Diplomacy.
Diplomacy.
Next one.
Military.
Okay.
Airspace.
Airspace.
Water.
Water.
Borders. Yeah.
Okay. So hold on.
Let me ask you an additional question before you continue.
Sure.
Can you have a state in your judgment without control over your diplomacy, your borders, your airspace, your military, or your water?
Okay. I think that you can have a state if you have control of your diplomacy, your water, and your borders. And then I think your military and your airspace can definitely be negotiated along with the security concerns of your neighbors.
Let's run with that. Find me one that offered them that.
Okay, that offered them security guarantees for their diplomacy,
for their diplomacy,
their water, and their borders.
Sure, diplomacy, water, borders.
Okay, I'm assuming based off of the way you're asking the question, the answer is already no.
You'd be assuming right. Yeah.
So
just to be clear, the reason why we're talking about this is because they have not been offered a state. What they have been offered is a non-state that they're calling a state, and they're calling it a state so that international observers can go, look, the dirty Arabs didn't want peace. It's their fault.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, hold on. So let's talk. Let's talk about this, okay?
Sure.
Because there's probably, I don't want to. I'm not going to totally send for Israel, but I'm going to ask.
I don't think you have so far. I'm going to be fair to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So with water, that's going to be a question of geography, right?
True, yeah.
So the River Jordan, if Israel has a certain claim to certain like water reclamation facilities or whatever, they're probably going to want to maintain those in order to, basically guarantee their water access for Israel. So, at that point, I would be asking if Palestine is asking for, guaranteeing, wanting their own desalination plants, their own water plants on the River Jordan.
Why don't we just cross water off the list? Okay, let's let water be a thing, then negotiate. It's a bit complicated ecologically. Water goes from one place and ends in another place. I get it. Yeah.
So let's go for diplomacy.
Okay.
So you're saying that Israel was never on the table recognizing some kind of Palestinian state that had the right to negotiate based off of diplomacy.
To have its own diplomacy with other countries, yeah.
So that was not on the table ever.
No.
Okay. Yeah. Then that's
And there's
yeah.
a very good reason for this, by the way, because a Palestinian
Uh,
autonomous state would be actually a very severe security risk for Israel now. You'd have something that now has true sovereignty, the ability as a state to raise arms, to do diplomacy with other countries, to make alliances, to make trade with other countries, maybe even to prosper. And every single member of that population has a family member who's been destroyed by the state of Israel specifically. You'd have a growing power right next to you that has every single reason to resent you in a way almost as deep as some peoples resent the slavery done by the British and the Americans. Like it's bad. It's really bad.
sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, if that is true, I'm presuming it's true based off of the fact that you have a book.
This
Yeah,
book this
if
book
they
is
were
on ISIS, but yeah.
well, right, but I'm assuming you have read a different book or perhaps a Wikipedia article.
Oh, I think I actually didn't look up
So
any more earlier. I am very tired. I've been going for a while. Continue, please.
no, it's okay. So what I was going to say is I would see that as unacceptable from a negotiative standpoint, but also I would hope that if there's adults in the room, I mean, you and I are both relatively speaking adults, I would hope that the Palestinian Authority would be able to like say like, hey, listen, we're either a state or we're fucking not. You're extending us these territorial grants. Thank you. But at the same time, if we don't have sovereignty over our own diplomatic affairs, then who's to say that you're not just going to say these are null and void for some reason? And even non-state actors. So, for instance, let's say that there's a Palestinian terrorist group that doesn't accept the diplomatic overtures conducted by the Palestinian Authority or Hamas, and then they take their own violent action against Israel, then Israel uses that as a pretext in order to ignore the sovereignty of the Palestinian territory. Yeah, absolutely. I would see why you wouldn't sign that.
Here's a question for you too. Okay, so the PLOs who rejected the Camp David, right? So here's a question. Why was it the PLO? Why was the PLO negotiating on behalf of the Palestinians?
I'm assuming they're the closest thing to a government that the West Bank had.
Well, where was the PLO for a large period of time? Do you know? They weren't in Palestine.
I don't.
Okay, they were in Lebanon and Syria.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So, how did they, given that they weren't there, how did they become the government of the Palestinians in Gaza?
Well, this is me presuming too much. Maybe I'm being too charitable to the PLO. I would assume that you would govern in absentia because you would be worried that if you were within your own territory that didn't have sovereign protection, then your liability for assassination. That's why I assume Hamas's infrastructure is in Bahrain or Oman, is so that they don't just get randomly schwacked by IDF special forces.
Yeah, there wasn't any government in Palestine by the Palestinians at this point. So the PLO wasn't doing that. The PLO was engaging in terror attacks in neighboring countries. The reason why the PLO became the government in Palestine was because Israel made a deal to recognize the PLO as the government in Palestine in order to undercut, once again, other organizations that were already at the UN negotiating for Palestinian statehood. And what they were able to do, because the PLO was in exile for a long time, and they were run by they were run by some very elitist, not very flexibly minded people who were more concerned with being in charge than with actually securing statehood for the Palestinians. They accepted terms that were not advantageous to Palestinian autonomy. In fact, kind of cemented it for all time as an impossibility. And as
wait, hold on.
exchange,
So you're saying
status.
these are the elite douchebags who are at the UN, or this is the PLO? Who are you talking about?
Talking about the PLO.
Okay.
The people at the UN were not elite douchebags. They were elites.
So let me follow up with this. So if Hillary Clinton, I am naturally distrustful of the state. So if you tell me that a politician is a liar, I'm not going to be shocked. So when Hillary Clinton is saying that, like, well, if the Palestinians had just signed on to the Camp David Accords, they would have had a state for 24 years at this point. Do you think that she's an earnest State Department representative who's trying to advocate in the interest of multiple parties? Or do you think that she's a liar who basically knows that she's passing on a poison deal? Not that she was the Secretary of State at the time. It was her husband.
It's Hillary Clinton. Is that a trick question?
Well, I think that your cynicism, I agree with. but I think that people who are more charitable to the U.S. State Department would hope that there was representatives who were actually advocating for the benefit of all.
Yeah, I think that's a little naive.
Damn, you're hella cynical.
Well,
Okay, you're more cynical than me.
yeah,
That's interesting.
I hope so, to be
No,
honest.
well,
Um,
no. So actually, I want to ask you a follow-up question then.
yeah.
So, do from your perspective, does it seem like I know there was like a lefty Israeli politician who seemed good faith and he got assassinated. But every other Israeli offer for peace or a two-state solution, or at least a nominal non-state entity with secure borders, do you
Well,
see all
careful.
of
That
this
that's
as
that's
bad faith negotiation?
well, sort of intrinsically, if you're talking about something that's being sold as a state, so that it can be blamed on the Palestinians for rejecting it, but is not actually a state. Because what happens if they
Uh,
accept terms that don't give them a state? What happens? Why do you suppose they would offer those? What do you think that does? What is the
well,
purpose to offering a state that isn't actually a state?
my presumption, I think I alluded to it earlier, is that since they're not a state, if they violate any level of the agreement, then you can say this agreement is now void. And since that person doesn't have diplomatic ties to other countries, they don't have security with their own water, they don't have the ability to develop a sophisticated military apparatus, all that kind of stuff, they cannot protect their own territorial claims as a result.
No. So
Interesting.
here's the actual reason. The actual reason is because if you have a stabilized treaty situation which they have accepted particular terms, then then further incursions that are within those terms can no longer be treated as I'll put it more simply. If you agree to an arrangement that says, yes, I Arafat signed this accord, and we are now recognized as a state, barring that we don't have control over our airspace, our diplomacy, or water, or borders, etc., etc., etc. We
Or
don't have a
military.
military
Yeah.
one. Yeah, okay. Um, the bid for a Palestinian state is now dead, but it's better than that because it's dead, and now nobody will ever know, because in the eyes of the world, there's a Palestinian state. Oh, but it's not a real state, and now it's obscured even further. Now there's no capacity whatsoever to argue for it because it's done, right?
Well, yeah, but you have to recognize that with your ambitions, right?
No,
If you're the Palestinians,
sorry, it's freezing in here.
no,
My
it's
AC just
fine.
blasted.
Well, that's excellent. The with the territory, okay, with the territory claim. So let's talk about it. All right. So water, we talked about it. It's complicated. Obviously, you want security over your own water because then your enemies can shut off the tap. Right. There we go. So let's say that the Palestinians they make some kind of plan for a water treatment facility on the River Jordan. Bam, we got water taken care of. Let's say that we move on to diplomacy.
Okay.
With diplomacy, Israel says you are barred from soliciting support from other Arab nations in regards to XYZ ABC military technology, and you are also prohibited from soliciting XYZ ABC dual use technology. You're not allowed to do it because basically it's too big of a security risk for us. Um, okay, like I can kind of see that. Then, when it comes to the military or whatever, it's like you have security over your own borders. You can have a militia, provisional defense force, whatever, in order to secure the Gazan border and all that kind of stuff. But if you start a military buildup, we're going to view that as a violation of your creation as a non-state entity or whatever. These are still infinitely better than what is happening to the Palestinian people.
You mean them being like bombed and mass evicted to the tune of 2 million people, and their homes blown and
Yeah,
their homes being bulldozed? Yeah, I tend to agree. But
yeah,
but what you're basically arguing though is like, well, you've got a choice. You can have segregation or slavery. What's your pick? I mean, obviously, given the two,
yeah.
you're gonna pick 40s America over 1890s America, right?
Yeah,
But is that the right timeline? I have no idea. But
1850, but close enough.
yeah. So, but that's not really relevant here, because what you're basically saying as well, with the benefit of foresight, Arafat might have accepted a deal that was fraudulent, because if he didn't, then his people are all going to get massacred by the people he's having a bad faith he was negotiating a bad faith treaty with. I guess I just don't see how this gets us to a place where anything that Israel's doing is in the right. It seems to just be raw force, which is a way you can go,
Yeah.
but then you got a problem, because if might makes right, well, you don't actually have an argument against October 7th. I do. That's the advantage of my position.
Well, I mean, I have an argument against October 7th insofar as you shouldn't like slaughter civilians or rape women or take hostages within like the rules of engagement of armed conflict. But
Well, I mean, the rules of engagement.
the
Do you think Israel is following the rules of engagement in armed conflict?
relatively speaking, yeah.
Relatively, their civilian to militant death ratio is substantially worse than Hamas's so far, impressively.
Uh, yeah, this is like murder with intent and like collateral damage. Like we're talking about.
Okay, but hang on.
Intent matters to me in
Sure,
death.
sure, but if you're displacing 2 million people, and you know that you're displacing 2 million
Yeah,
people,
you're knowingly causing,
and well, not just
collateral
knowingly
damage
causing.
and
This
death.
isn't passive. Literally, it's just the bare fact that the ordinance Israel has is bigger, is giving you the wiggle room to say, well, technically anybody could be in this blast radius, and we just don't care. So what we're going to do is we're just going to shoot a bomb here, say Hamas was hiding there, we saw a rocket, and then everything else we're fine, because that's just the fog of war. But they're clearly pushing to. We both agree they're trying to get all the Palestinians out of Gaza, and you've said this. I haven't said. They want to cleanse it entirely in this conversation, at least. So, given that that's the case, would it not be reasonable to assume that the actions that are facilitating that are taken with that in mind?
So hold on.
Yeah.
So let's back up a little bit.
Yes.
If Jordan said we are going to take all 2 million Gazan civilians, I think Israel would celebrate. They would pave it. They would turn it into a fucking parking lot. And in 2 decades, it wouldn't be called Gaza. It'd be called some Jewish name, right?
Okay.
Then I think Egypt would, same thing. If the Egyptians accepted the Gazan civilians as refugees, then Israel would celebrate. That being said, Egypt hasn't. Jordan hasn't. There's no indications that they're going to. And so as a result, Israel now and will have 1.999 million people when this is all said and done, still stuck on their southern border in a shitty situation with no infrastructure, all that bullshit. So when you're talking about like whether or not Israel is trying to maximize civilian death or collateral, I think they could be being haphazard. I think they could be being punitive or vengeful, but this is not even close to the scale of what they're capable of. They could drop 3 500-pound bombs in Rafah right now, and they could double or triple their civilian casualty stats. We're talking about like one of the most dense place on the planet, and on top of that, like urban warfare is worse. So, here's the thing: you're saying that Israel is
just to be
creating
clear,
these conditions intentionally. Yeah, sorry.
If I may, so just to be clear, where you're going with this is, if Israel really wanted to get rid of the Palestinians, they really wanted to kill them all, they would just nuke Gaza. Obviously, why wouldn't they?
Or they would be even looser with the ROE than they already are.
But we already know that there are consequences internationally to them doing so.
Sure.
Right. So wouldn't that be enough to say, well, they're trying to do this slyly?
Sorry. Yeah, I had a joke there. I'll refrain.
What was the joke? Coward.
No, I was going to play into an anti-Semitic trope. It's yeah. So, yeah, sure. I mean, here's the thing. So I think I want to back up because I think there's going to be something that we could agree on more. You're saying that like, well, doesn't this just boil down to might makes right? Yeah. If the Palestinians accept the state, and by the way, I don't think that this was like with substantive forethought. I think that, Arafat, I think the Palestinians still see the writing on the wall. which is a slow crawl of Israeli power over these
I think
territories.
slow is probably not the word anymore, but yeah.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, I would say the West Bank is probably going to take 100 years in order for them to colonize and sufficiently displace the Arab population
I
to the point that they
I
feel
don't think so.
control.
No, they've been accelerating it quite a bit actually over the course of the last few months. Because one of the great things about Gaza is that nobody's paying attention to the other parts. Um,
Well, I would be looking at the population. This is from a myriad of conversations, but it's my understanding that they don't actually want to territorially control Gaza and the West Bank, because if they do, and then they admit the Arab locals as citizens into the Israeli state, they are going to demographically shift Israel to the point that they're going to feel fucked within their own democracy. That's my understanding
this
of
is
it.
the UN as of March 26th. Amid worsening humanitarian situation in Gaza, settlement activities have continued and intensified. Um, so it's not going slow. It's going. What is this? Oh, I see. Gotcha. It's going faster as the bombing in Gaza continues, and I have a suspicion that the reason for this is that they're allowing this to proceed less impeded, or abetting it even, because once the Gaza situation is over, now you have two separate humanitarian catastrophes in your recent history to contend with.
Okay.
Yeah,
So all right. So just little pushback.
sure.
Intensifying is always going to be a word that I'm going to be skeptical of for degree. So, for instance, let's say that there's like a 50% increase in like settlements, but that's still like a few thousand people or whatever. I'm not going to think that the West Bank is going to be seized overnight. And also on top of that, I'm confident in my like demographic and population metrics that I don't think that you're going to have the West Bank be under Israeli control in the next decade or two. That would be wildly surprising to me. I'll happily eat crow on it if I have to. Um, excuse me. So hold on. So the area where I think we could understand each other even if we don't agree is there's a Greek saying, it comes from the Athenians. They were massacring this town and slaughtering people.
You're talking
And
about
it's because
Milos.
this
You're
what is
talking
that
about the
because
Melian
they
dialogue. Yeah,
did they stay neutral? Was
they
that the
did.
story?
They did. Yeah,
Yeah. And then the famous saying is the powerful do what they can and the weak suffer what they must.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you want to know what's
So I mean
funny?
that's
The Athenians.
actually how I see it.
Yeah, but
Uh-huh.
you want to know the punchline of that though? The Athenians lost the war.
Well, is it because they pissed off the Molotians or the millions?
No, it's because they followed through on that logic entirely. And they used their
Mm.
strength, disregarding the situation around them, disregarding the people around them, and they overextended themselves, and as a consequence, they were defeated mercilessly.
Well, were they not ultimately still correct with their saying, even though they were the ones who suffered it?
Well, the thing about that is, the strong do what they will, and the weak suffer what they must. It presumed that strength was something that was simply contained by one party and wasn't itself a configuration of a broader field that included more than just them. And as a
Sure.
consequence of Israel acting as quote unquote the strong, they created the conditions of their own destruction. They created conditions in which they were feared, in which people now allied against them, and they created conditions under which they became accustomed to arrogant and reckless action that resulted in them spending their entire military on a doomed assault on Sicily. So,
Well, yeah. So that's actually an interesting question. So I don't see this flipping on the Israelis. I hope that they're smart enough to realize that they probably can't mass slaughter 2 million Gazan civilians. And if the casualty stats get insane, then they're going to get fucked diplomatically and economically. And
but
they're
I mean,
already
they
suffering
already
those
are. I
consequences.
don't think the
Yeah,
casualty numbers
exactly.
matter. I said this how many months ago? I said this a few months ago, back when the death toll was
Uh-huh.
something to the tune of 6,000. And I said if the numbers were double, I think we'd be having the exact same conversation. Not a jot difference. And I think this is playing out.
Okay.
I don't think the numbers particularly matter. I think we would be having the exact same conversation now if the estimated dead was at 6,000 or at 8,000. I don't think we'd be talking about this any differently.
But I still think we're in the window of justifiable Israeli military action. Hamas still exists. They still have operating cells in Gaza. They also still have hostages.
Well, they always will.
Like,
You don't take out an
they will
insurgency.
always have hostages. They will always have cells.
Well, at this rate, they're going to kill the hostages before they actually manage to beat Hamas.
Uh-huh.
They're beating down representatives of the hostages' families right now, who are protesting Israel's operations in Rafah. Israel
Yeah,
has
because they know
refused.
there's an
Israel has
increased chance that they're
refused.
going to kill their hostages. Yeah.
Israel has refused terms to have their hostages returned.
Well, this is where I gotta
Well,
give
it's
you a
just kind
little
of
bit
a
of
fact,
pushback as
right?
far as, well, didn't didn't Hamas say we can't account for all of them and we also can't guarantee that they're going to be alive? Wasn't that part of the most recent conversation?
I mean, that's kind of a given, though, is it not? Of course, they can't guarantee they're
Sure,
going to be
it
alive.
is. But how
A
about you
large.
tell me how many you have that are alive, and we'll decide how long of a ceasefire we want to go for.
Well, who's killing the hostages, Connor?
I would assume that you don't. Well,
I would
hold
assume
on.
you probably don't want
Uh,
to kill your own hostages. That's kind of defeats the purpose of having hostages.
Well, it's all going to be a scale thing. It's always going to be a scale. If you have to sacrifice 10,000 troops in order to save one hostage, then you're just going to go kill everybody, and you're going to kill the hostage.
What are you talking about? You've lost me a little bit.
Okay, so you're saying that Israel, and you're smirking a little bit. So I'm assuming what's going on
I'm just
is
at an
that
angle. I'm not smirking.
is
I'm just smiling.
okay. So I'm assuming what you're saying
Mhm.
is that Israel, through their aggressive military operations, has been confirmed to have killed several of their own hostages.
Yes.
And not just that, but probably through worsening the conditions of the people of Gaza by not providing water, food, medicine, et cetera, there were probably some elder hostages or some immunocompromised hostages or whatever who also died indirectly from Israel's own military actions and sanctions and blockades and all that kind of bullshit. Because basically, if Hamas was able to get medicine, then maybe they could have treated the hostages. Am I inferring okay so far?
That's probably a little bit more elaborate than I would go. I would be very surprised if they didn't lose a bunch of the hostages and flat out didn't know where they were.
I mean,
You have
that's a decent
millions of
point.
people displaced and condensed into one spot. Like, how are they gonna, like, how are they getting out of there? How are they signaling that, hey, I'm a hostage, let me out? They're just a person. They could be buried under rubble somewhere. We have no idea.
Sure.
Yeah.
But then I would hope that Hamas, because this is the thing about like command and control, which I'm not saying that Hamas is particularly good at, they could do an inventory of the ones that they could account for.
Hamas is really good at that, actually. Like, really good.
So they should be able to say, out of the 33 requested hostages, we can account for 15 of them, 8 of them are alive. What do you want for the 8 that are alive and the 7 corpses?
Well, it sounds like that's what they did. They said, like, hey, we'll give you our hostages, we'll give you your hostages, but we can't guarantee that their condition. I mean, keep in mind, like, while
Well,
these negotiations were being considered, there was still
well,
shelling. There was
this
still.
is something that I'm going to point out, though.
Mhm.
I am willing to admit and concede instantly that Israel could be negotiating in bad faith, particularly when it comes to like them ultimately wanting to take more of the territory, right? But are you willing to equally admit that Hamas and Palestinians and folks, the PLO and all that kind of stuff, also are potentially negotiating in bad faith in order to achieve their own ends, and that they might spit, they might lick a gift horse in the mouth or spit on a deal that's decent?
Well, I mean, given the fact they have been offered a deal that's decent, it's been misportrayed to the international community in order to justify further brutality against them. Given the fact that while negotiations have been taking place, their civilian populations have been brutalized, and given the fact the entire premise of this whole thing is a long sequence of massacres both in and around the territory of Israel,
Yeah,
Palestine.
I'll give
I mean,
you
if you're asking me,
my logic.
if you're asking me, do I think that uh, a much weaker party that knows that the
Yeah,
much
let
stronger
me
party it's negotiating with is operating in bad faith, is also operating in bad faith and looking at quote unquote gift horse in the mouth? I mean, obviously they'd be
Yeah,
stupid not
I'm
to.
I'm gonna give you my logic.
Okay,
I'm gonna give you my logic, and you don't have to agree with it, but
all right,
maybe you'll see it at least. So, if Israel's conducting military operations, they probably kill civilians, et cetera, et cetera. All right,
yeah,
they at least have the social tact and intelligence to pretend that they give a shit, that they're taking operations in order to reduce civilian casualties, et cetera, even to pretend.
Slow down, Israel is?
Hamas, yeah.
I don't even know
I
if they're.
would say,
I
I don't think
pretend to. You're giving them a lot of credit if you say they're pretending. They'll say that they're obviously doing so, but it doesn't look like they're trying very hard. In fact,
okay.
it looks like
At least they know to lie. Well, then from your perspective, at least from my perspective, at least they know to lie about it.
We have
okay?
we have a lot of quotes by them. We have we have a lot of quotes by them now talking about how
DOD
all of the
or the DOE talking about how they're gonna glass Gaza or some shit. Sure. Okay.
Let's wash.
True. So when Hamas did October 7th, just through virtue of what they themselves were posting to social media,
right?
We saw women shot.
Yeah.
We saw their bodies being dragged through the street. We saw bloody hostages being dragged, screaming, crying, all that kind of bullshit. We saw child hostages. We saw men and women and children cowering inside bunkers and militants throwing grenades at the civilians intentionally. We saw them brutalize international aid workers, or not even international aid workers. I think it was just a contractor. We saw a Malaysian guy who's not Israeli or Filipino or some shit.
Or Ian
and
Miles
they just
Chung.
We could only wish. And they beat him down to the ground. They took a gardening implement and they slowly hacked off his head. This is what they were posting to Twitter willingly. They were proud of it. They thought it was good. And this can only speak to a moral framing in which your enemies are beneath consideration. And not only that, their civilians are worthwhile targets. I have seen this repeated in euphemistic and in sanitized terms for the past 6 months. When it comes to the Western liberal hegemony, we don't say that these are good things. We don't glorify the slaughter of civilians for shits and giggles.
Well, that's interesting,
and we don't glorify the murder of people who are totally unrelated to the incident.
Except you do defend the murder of people totally unrelated to the incident in a unprecedentedly peaceful demonstration that was even signed on to by Hamas. That is the March of Return. So you do. Incidentally, we have records of people in Hamas who are moderating forces who actually, for example, were opposed to suicide bombing being killed by Mossad. We have the record of Hamas being given privileges, a kind of fostering by the Likud government in order to make sure that it gained prevalence over the other parties that might have proceeded along more peaceful lines. That might have actually.
Can we try to differentiate between me and the Israeli right-wing government?
I am trying very hard, but here's the general point I'm going at. Hamas is not the Palestinians. We know this for many reasons, besides their numbers, besides the fact that they are not signed on to by the majority of Palestinians, besides the fact that leading up to October 7th, they were actually experiencing dwindling popularity. We know this because they had to be fostered in the first place in order to undercut the other parties. So that being the case, Hamas really bad. Hamas really bad by design, because it gives Israel the perfect carte blanche excuse to do whatever they want to the Palestinians, because they always have an atrocity to respond to every single time. That's why they want them there. Peaceful protests, you don't want peaceful protesting Gazans or Palestinians if you're Likud, because those are people you have to negotiate with. You can get them violent if you can make sure that only the violent ones are able to function. Perfect. Let them do their little smuggling operations. Let them throw rockets every now and then that you shoot down. Doesn't matter. If you need to grab land, perfect. It's fantastic. You can always count on them to do something, right?
Fuck. We kind of zoomed out when I was trying to zoom in. Yeah. I mean, if you want me to say that Israel is probably playing.
And incidentally,
Hamas and the Palestinians and the diplomatic. Yep. Sorry, continue.
By October 7th, look at what Israel did, stopping the Hamas incursion. They didn't just shoot Hamas. They got a ton of their own civilians there as well, like a ton.
The Okay, so hold on. So we need to get into this because this is actually, you have been less frustrating in this regard, but there are lefties who are fairly frustrating for me in this
Okay.
regard. All right, so citing my my history nerddom along with my prior service. Okay,
Okay.
so when it seems like sometimes what is happening with lefties who are sympathetic to Palestine is that they are adding up the amount of military or terrorists that are dead,
Mm-hmm.
and they're counting those as lawful combatants. And then they're adding up the civilian dead, and they're saying, look over here. The Israelis and conventional military forces are able to kill way more civilians. Therefore, aren't they just as evil as the terrorists over here? Right?
Yeah.
That I'm not saying that you're necessarily making them equivalent, but some people
I'm
do.
following you. Yeah. Some people should do that.
Okay. So the frustration for me in that regard is that I'm going to use Afghanistan as an example.
Okay.
We went into Afghanistan. We conducted conventional military operations against the Taliban and Al Qaeda, and we probably killed a few thousand militants along with their supporters. Then, in the insurgency ensuing over the next 2 decades, which I would say is where a majority of the civilians were killed, we backed national government forces that were sympathetic to us, and we fought alongside them fighting insurgents like the Taliban and all that kind of stuff. What happened, I would say, in Iraq and in Afghanistan is two things. One, there was a conflict between national forces that were aligned with the West and the people who supported them. And then there was the people who supported the people who were against us. And they massacred the shit out of each other. Just just murdering civilians left, right, and center, reprisal attacks, families getting butchered, tortured, murdered, all the worst shit you can possibly imagine. And that will account for a shitload of the civilian casualties. Then, not only that, but you also had conventional forces going on patrols and trying to attack terrorist organizations, et cetera, et cetera. And when they're going on those attacks, if an asymmetric opponent hits you and you hit them back, oftentimes the asymmetric opponent is hiding amongst civilians and therefore will get civilians killed as a part of those operations. So, for me, there is a moral difference between conventional forces who are trying to engage an asymmetric opponent and who accidentally kill civilians as a result of those operations versus the asymmetric forces who intentionally slaughter men, women, and children because they think that that is going to bring about their faction's power.
Yeah. The
There
problem
is a
though.
moral difference.
Well, yeah, but the problem though is that that's not what's happening, because what you have is buildings with no terrorist presence are being tapped, and the people driven en masse, like in cities empty entirely. We're not talking about we're trying our best, but like sometimes there's a rocket coming from this store and we just have no choice but to shoot it before it shoots us. That's not what's happening. It's not a ticking time bomb. It's there are stories of, oh, Hamas is firing rockets, and therefore, without any proof whatsoever, Israel now takes carte blanche to do what it's wanted to do for a long time, specifically the Likud party wants to do for a long time, which is just get all the people out, all of them, indiscriminately. You don't get licensed to blow up a marketplace because there's one guy with a gun in it. That's not how that works.
I mean, actually, not defending that specifically, but there literally is a calculation of. Unfortunately, I had an Air Force friend who did this shit. There literally is a collateral damage calculation where they decide how high up the target is versus how many civilians they're going to kill in the airstrike, and then they make a decision off of that. And it also depends
Sure,
on
but they're
the
not they're not
target.
making decisions like that in Gaza. Like they're not doing that. They're just
Not right now, but
well,
wouldn't you say that
never.
before they probably were?
If they've displaced 1 million people, you can't sell to me that they're using any kind of discrimination there.
Yeah, I would say that they said that October 7th was an intolerable event, and as a result, they're going to do what's necessary in order to eliminate the institution of Hamas.
But they didn't eliminate the institution of Hamas. Hamas doesn't require
Uh-huh.
those cities to stand. They eliminated the cities. They got
Okay.
rid of the Palestinian
So,
civilians, right?
so if I had to guess, if I wasn't dumb, I'll use a non-ableist term or a less ableist term.
Brooks wants to come. Do you mind if my friend Brooks comes on? He's nicer than me. It's not going to be harsh.
Sure.
He's a war nerd, so he'd find this interesting. Yeah, Brooks,
Sure.
come into the guest thing.
As long as I can finish this idea, and then I'll be
No.
happy
Of course,
to talk
Yeah,
about
yeah. You'll have tons of time to talk.
Okay. So when it comes to we were talking about civilian operations, we were talking about knocking and talking and all that kind of stuff. Okay. So when it comes to what's going to happen next, right? What I would expect is that Israel, if they were smart, is they're going to conduct military operations in Rafah. They're probably going to kill a shitload more people than is necessary. Then they're going to let the civilians back into Gaza. If they were smart, they would help them with the rebuilding, although of course that's going to, potentially cause more Israeli casualties. Then they are going to say Hamas is a banned political entity in Gaza. We will not negotiate with them, and if they are a part of your organization, we will kill them. We are going to work with this new Gazan Reconstruction Authority or some shit like that. And so what's going to happen over the next few decades, if this is what happens, is the Gazan Construction Authority is going to be accused of being puppets of Israel, and therefore they're likely going to face pressure and potentially violence from the Gazans themselves. But also, since they have Israel as a working partner, and that's a wealthy, industrialized, technologically developed nation, they do have the opportunity to do real restructuring, getting real food, real water, etc., into that area. So that's what happens next.
You think they're going to let them back in and just rebuild the Gazan cities for the Palestinians?
I'll tell you what's not going to happen. They could let them sleep in rubble. They're not going to let Hamas be a official government arm of Gaza. That will not be permitted, regardless of whether or not the Gazan civilians are sleeping on rubble or rebuilt homes.
Well, I don't think they're going to be sleeping in Gaza at all. Where
are they going to go?
Well, they're probably going to be forcibly expelled from Palestine.
To where?
That's an excellent question. To wherever is neighboring Egypt, probably.
Jordan and Egypt are not going to accept them.
Israel's not.
They haven't agreed to accept them yet. To say they won't accept them is
you're booming.
Challenge.
You're booming, Brooks.
You're okay now on my end.
All right. The challenge comes when we start talking about like what is happening now versus what will, because it is, as everything is, always changing situations. Like Saudi Arabia had its deal with Israel, but the deal was only the beginning. The Saudi Arabia, the KSA just announced at the World Economic Forum that without peace in Gaza, without a two-state solution and a clear path to Palestine, I am using the right mic. Someday, fuck off. Saudi Arabia and Israel, there was the big deal. Oh, this peace accord, they're going to work together and work towards normalization. But they announced at the World Economic Forum that without a two-state solution and a clear path that is undisturbable was the word. That it's in jeopardy. Normalization with KSA is in jeopardy. That wasn't the case 4 months ago. And as this changes and shifts, as the situation becomes more and more dire, I would throw it back to another really great example, sort of in the past of things, that the Jewish people at one point begged for being refugees and were refused. And that changed how we sort of viewed them over time. It wasn't permanent and it wasn't great. So these things are changing. And so Jordan and Egypt, despite not having no reason to be responsible for these people, and they genuinely aren't. It's one of those things I'm always curious of. These people are Israeli citizens by any right that I can think of. The idea that Jordan or Israel have to be responsible is problematic. They will at some point. It will be so awful. It will be a call that they'll have to honor. And there will be other places that these people can go. But again, refugees don't go on to lead very successful lives, especially in the Middle East. We've seen this over and over. We saw this. Afghanistan is a great example of, a massive push of people out. Iraq, same thing. This diaspora of people that spread everywhere. That we'll just say haven't quite found a home yet and are causing lots of disturbances in a lot of countries. So these things are going to be shifting in a pretty significant way, especially as things get more and more serious. The move into Rafah, a lot of people didn't think that Israel would make the move. So the current peace deal that, whatever reason it fell apart, included a ceasefire and leaving Rafah alone, and Israel hasn't done that. And this seemed to be a thing that, like, we even had our head of state, the State Department, fly out for these talks because we were so certain they would accept it. For them not to accept it shows that there's a lot more going on here, and it's going to end up getting worse and worse until it's genuinely Darfur level, if it's not there already.
Very quickly, Brooks, if you can lower your gain, it's not your volume, it's your gain.
I'm trying.
It's fuzzy.
So, okay. So the reason why I'm kind of adamant that Israel was probably always going into Rafah is because of historical examples that I can think of in Iraq. The main being Fallujah. So what happened in Fallujah was a bunch of American contractors went in with limited support. They got butchered by the local population. Their bodies were burned and they were hung from the bridges.
No, and I'm happy to stipulate. I agree with you. My assumption is Rafah was always going to be the thing we're doing. Like I'm not saying. I'm saying I'm with you. Like I think it's silly that people thought they wouldn't want. I think it's silly that they don't. They're going to take all of Gaza and the West Bank. Like we know how the amoeba is moving. This is not new. They've stated very cleanly. The head of the military in Israel flatly said that they're going to be doing this. There's a reason they're doing that thing that is super war crimey, where you blow up bomb buildings and then you send in bulldozers to like clear the rubble, which is like, maybe they're like it's not a thing you're supposed to do. Like,
well, yeah. So I guess that's my question to both you and President Sunday. Then is like, so what do you see? So for instance, we let's say the Rafah operation goes through. Israel goes in, they kill a bunch of military-age males and a shitload of collateral damage. There's people starving, they're getting cholera, they're dying. We get a bunch of videos and pictures of Arab Muslims, starving or dying from preventable disease because they're living in tents and, they don't have enough water and they don't have enough food and this, that, the other. And then who takes them? And who remains in the territory of Gaza physically?
Israel should take all of it as a singular state. There's no I see no reason to not have that. Everyone should be granted.
But if they take that and then they do the expulsion, let's say that every single
that would be
Arab Muslim. Well, wait. So you're just saying they militarily control it?
No. I think Brooks is saying that they should give the Palestinians a state.
No, I'm saying that Israel is the entire region already. Whatever the name is, I really don't personally give a shit about. The state that runs Gaza is Israel currently. The Netanyahu government runs that. These people are Israeli citizens. The West Bank people are Israeli citizens. We pretend like they're not. But again, Hamas was only elected because Israel allowed an election to happen. That's not how a state works. That's how a high school works. That they let the students have.
But Israel is not going to let the Arab Muslims have Israeli citizenship because of demographic concerns.
Then, so you enjoy the idea of an ethno state. See, for me, I think the pressure should.
I'm being descriptive.
Well, no, my point would be that the U.S.'s job is to apply as much political pressure as possible, and we can. We 100%, we control what happens in Israel. Israel doesn't control us. There's a tail wagging the dog thing happening. If we were to just simply say, well, you don't get any more funds, they're going to stop doing what they're doing. If we were to go in and start supporting the more peaceful sides of the Israeli government, which exist, and the Israeli population, which exists, even the hardcore Hasids who are like crazy over the top, they don't want war. They're actually getting the shit kicked out of them by the IDF. There's neo-Nazi groups who are Israeli first, Jewish second. The actual neo-Nazi groups in Israel. It's an amazing sort of thing that's happened there. So if we were to go in and support more centrist, real libertarian sort of liberal views, we actually could find people having all their rights. We won't get there because the hardline right currently controls a significant amount of Israel's government. But I think there's no reason to assume that Israelis as a whole, and that's Arab, Jewish, Christian, can't all just live there because they have the right.
No, I think very quickly. So I'm in agreement with you, Brooks. But I think very quickly, just to be fair to Connor here, I don't think he was saying that this is what he believes ought to happen. I think he was saying
I know, but I'm just saying, like, to me,
and
the presupposition that they can't is my issue, and I don't agree with the presupposition that they can't solve for this, because I think they can.
This is okay. This is where I'll try to be a little bit more specific, so you can see what I'm getting at. Mm-hmm. So you, me, and President Sunday are all wildly intelligent, wildly handsome gentlemen on the internet who should have millions of subscribers and millions of dollars in the bank account. However, we are not. We are three people who debate in Twitch and YouTube politics. And so I think that we can see the possible, and we can even maybe have an infinitesimally small impact on national discourse However, I think that we can all see trend lines in the way that like politicians currently operate, and we can also see the Overton window as it currently exists.
Mhm.
I don't see any like will or knowledge in the American people to press Israel into admitting all of Gaza as citizens. And I think the Israelis would find a lot of Americans sympathetic where they say, why the fuck would you force us to make these people citizens? They just slaughtered 1,000 of us indiscriminately on October 7th. There's no fucking way we're giving them free travel, education, infrastructure, water, et cetera, and the lay of the land within our border.
Well, I mean, a lot.
That's not going to
I
happen.
mean, my response to it would be, of course, that a lot of Americans simply don't understand how the world works, or frankly, where any of this is even taking place. The point, though, is that none of this is an argument against Israel being capable of expelling the Palestinians to neighboring countries to live in refugee camps. That would just suggest that. Well, actually, kind of suggests the opposite. You've just actually provided one of the reasons why they would be more inclined to do so. Haven't you? Because if they don't want them back, if they don't want them as denizens or citizens, well, what's left? Because you've got two choices then. Well, I guess you got three. You got a homeless population that is now more prone to radicalization than it was before, or you can kick them out, or you can kill them all. There's really all you've got.
Yeah.
Well, and my question would be, what do we see? So let's push forward into the future. I would argue that if we want to care about, and again, Israel as a state has a lot of loaded baggage, but let's just say whatever the state is that exists in Israel, the people who live there being able to live their lives, have McDonald's, have food, have healthcare, all those things. Do we want that to exist in 5 or 10 years? I like the idea, maybe not Israel. I have issues with an ethno state as a thing, but I like the idea of people having freedom. And I prefer it to, say, the current governments of, say, Afghanistan, as an example, just as a nearby thing. That setup that allows people to be there, do you think it's going to survive if they go in and they really push this? Because again, the KSA pulling away from a normalization pact here should be telling. It should be very, very telling. Iran willing to take military action on Israeli soil is new and scary. And Hezbollah pushing in as they are is kind of new and scary too. So when we start having these things and this pressure pot happening, my question would be, what is the long-term health of a country that is that militarily involved if the US isn't willing, and I don't believe we would ever put boots on the ground or commit actual military resources in the way that people probably expect. I don't think we would get there. But is Israel long for this world? And that's the part that scares me, genuinely.
Oh yeah, there's no way the United States would let a territorial incursion into Israel go unanswered.
Does it have to go
and there's
that
no
far?
military.
Again,
There's no.
that's a presumption that it's like a normal military invasion. If it's just, say, a smaller group or ISIS or any of these ISIL or anyone else who happens to bomb the right building, kill the right leadership, you start having faction wars inside of Israel. That's completely reasonable to assume it's going to happen.
If you're asking me for predictions.
No, I'm asking, like, what do you think is the long-term reality of Israel as a state?
Yeah, I'll tell you exactly. You're massively underestimating Israeli stability. I think that like tribalism and tribal mindset along ethno-religious lines is one of like the most common things in the human species. So what I would expect is that there's going to be a fork in the road once the Rafah operation is over, which is going to be you either literally like militarily occupy half-assed and negotiate with some nominal government that is in charge of some level of rebuilding, but you don't really give a shit. So you just let all the Gazans sleep in rubble and literally stack bricks on top of bricks. And that's their punishment for daring to do 10-7. That's one option. The second option is you actually think that you're partially responsible for 10-7 by, as President Sunday indicated, incentivizing Hamas's existence, incentivizing violence, incentivizing people to hate you. And as a result, you say, I need to build back some public goodwill. So as a result, we're going to take the redevelopment and reconstruction of Gaza as a very serious personal issue. And we'll risk security forces and development and money in order to rebuild Gaza up to a decent standard.
and move
I think
Israelis
that's a
in
possibility.
as they do.
Well,
They'll
I
move
hope they wouldn't
Israelis
fucking
in.
move Israelis in, because that would be the goddamn problem, wouldn't it?
Well, I mean, it's what they've done every other step of the way in every one of these other pushes.
Then I would consider that a version of option 1, where you let the Gazans sleep in rubble while you move in settlers.
Right. And again, I think this is the reason I think maybe you're overestimating is I think proof of what happened on October 7th shows that the IDF is an incredibly useless overall military force, because it was a bunch of shit.
True.
Absolutely a bunch of shitheads.
No, it's a mix.
No,
it's a mix. This is what you get when you have
you have a conscription army that is basically funded externally and non-voluntary. This is what you end up with.
You took 80%
there's a reason
of my
that they
point.
have shittier
hang on.
soldiers.
Let Connor respond, Brooks.
Yeah, you took 80% of my point. So Israeli special forces are probably amongst the premier elite fighting forces on the planet. They have the technological capability for an advanced air force. They do have an awesome missile interception. Hold on, let me finish. Missile interception force. They do have a lot of tech people. They also have like a semi-competent, I mean, it's to us, it's a Coast Guard, but they have a semi-competent technological Navy. So these things they have in the volunteer section, they have extreme military competence. But what I will concede to you, because you already said it, is that 80-90% of it is effectively a National Guard volunteer force. And we've seen that conscripts are dog shit soldiers. Yeah. Never in a million fucking years would you have, I think there was like 200 or 300 American, there were 200 or 300 IDF soldiers that were killed on October 7th. And they were killed because they were overrun, trapped in a bunker, and then ultimately killed by Hamas militants. There will not be...
They were literally asleep.
Yeah. There will not be an American outpost. The closest thing is Cop Keating, and even they killed a shitload of insurgents. There will not be
they fought pretty hardcore.
Exactly.
Like it's movie level. There will not be
an American base that falls that level. They will fire every single fucking bullet. They will kill every motherfucker that comes after them, and they'll call fucking airstrikes on the position.
No, and Sunday and the other people in his chat
have shown their incompetence.
They'll tell you, I'm not pro-military, but I'm not anti-military. My uncle, he finished off his military career as a 4-star general in the Army. So I come from a military family. I've had them around. I've dealt with good and bad. I support individual soldiers, I suppose would be the way I'd put it. But one of the things that I've always sort of been fascinated by, especially after getting to watch what happened in Afghanistan and Iraq sort of from afar, and also friends there, I had a friend hit by it, like different stories. I would ask you this. If you were going to anywhere in Afghanistan, did you serve, by the way, over there?
I went to Iraq. I didn't go to Afghanistan.
Iraq as well. If you went over there and you and a bunch of your crew sitting around, you go, we're supposed to go into that village, but let's just blow it up. Would that happen? Like, no. Genuinely, that's, to me, it's, and everyone here was giving me shit. I'm like, our soldiers, as much as we know bad shit happened, there are fucked up people in every military, like their stories. The way American soldiers engage is very different than the way Israeli soldiers have engaged throughout everything in Gaza. And we have video of them posting to TikTok and other places, proudly doing what I just described. And we're kind of cool with it. And that's where I start going.
There's two tangents here. One, I would say no, not intentionally. I think one of the most accurate depictions of American armed forces during the War on Terror is an HBO series called Generation Kill. They do kill civilians. They accidentally shoot a few people. They accidentally kill a few people in cars. They accidentally kill a girl. Somebody else calls in an airstrike on a house that didn't have any insurgent activity in it, because the insurgents basically fired mortars from that position and then scooted away. So somebody called in an airstrike like 30 minutes after the fact, and it wipes out a family, and they see that happen. So I would say that those things happen. But generally speaking, you're not going to have American volunteer military forces say, we can go in there and get into a gun battle, or we can just knowingly murder dozens of civilians. So as a result, because we don't want to risk our ass, we're going to knowingly murder dozens of civilians. That doesn't typically happen.
One of the things that just happens to be what's happening in Gaza, and again, I don't have
Well,
proof that they have these orders.
that actually gets to my second tangent. So second tangent is, I think conscript military has a different mentality where, since they're civilians and they might be proud of their military service, but they want to survive to go back to their civilian life.
Right.
And also, since they're not volunteers, the government doesn't want to waste their lives, because if they do waste a bunch of conscripts' lives, they know that the conscript family members are going to pitch a fucking fit. The war's going to get unpopular and they're going to have to pull out earlier than they want to. The advantage of an voluntary military force is, one, they're all volunteers, so the civilian population can say, hey, you signed up for the job, fuck you, you got to go. And then two, that also breeds a mentality within the volunteers of, I'm here, I signed up for the job, I'm going to do the job to the best of my ability, and if that involves getting injured or killed, it is what it is.
Also, you see a lot more with conscript services. Doing any kind of court martial is almost silly at that point because of the nature of sort of the beast. People want a military career generally. When it's voluntary, they at least think about it. They want to hit, E5, something else. They want to make it a little bit further, get there. They're thinking long term. Conscript, it's not the case, at least in my experience. In a lot of countries who have conscript services, there's a lot of great stories, and I don't mean great in like good, I mean great and like almost comedic, of like the UAE forces that went into Yemen, who thought that these conscript with the best fucking equipment, the best paid for guns and everything, who really never did. They got fucking run aground by a handful of Yemenis who really were like these poor farmers with AKs, but they knew how to fight because that's what they've been doing for like 100 years. But then again, this is where I start. My issue is, and it's one of the most powerful moments for me military wise. My uncle had a big, he was a Stryker brigade in Iraq was his thing. The Strykers, he was like super, I used to make jokes. You ever see the movie Stripes? It was like the minivan with like, it was like a hyper technical
I haven't seen
tank.
it, but I'm familiar. I have
it's really cool shit.
I have a few friends who are cavalry.
I used to give him a bunch of shit about he was Bill Murray. Like it was a running joke. And I went and he had this big ceremony of a bunch of guys coming back in a sort of remembrance thing. And this one guy, there's a famous photo of him holding a dead baby, a dead Iraqi baby. It was one of the most horrifying photos that exists, and there's a lot of ways to interpret it. But the way that he talked about it, being able to like see that moment and hear how he spoke of this thing hitting him, this human baby, and I do not see at all, and I mean period, that from anyone in the IDF. And I don't mean one or two. There's assholes in American military who said awful racist shit back to their families, sure. But you still saw people who like, we're here, we're trying to help, the blah, blah, blah. They'd say race, but it's a different mentality. Flatly racist, dehumanizing shit across the board from the soldiers in the IDF is another reason that gives me pause that this is not the side to back.
Well, so
have you seen where's the IDF soldier who's sad?
Yeah, so well, I'm sure they exist, but I do agree with you that it's absolutely more tribalist, and you can see like vengeance as a motivation within some of these videos, right? Where I would side is that there were Americans that were absolutely motivated by violence and vengeance in the wake of 9/11, and I met them, and they're still interesting guys, and they were competent military folk. Now, that being said, they were relatively restrained by our culture of like professional military shit, where they knew that if they intentionally slaughtered civilians, blew up buildings, destroyed infrastructure that didn't need to be destroyed, et cetera, then it could be their ass. Like literally, they could end up in a prison cell for 5 to 10 years. And then same thing.
It happened. It really did happen too.
Well, no, it happened. I have a friend who served with Robert Bales. Robert Bales was the guy who freaked out, and he basically walked off base and butchered like 15 people or 20 people, men, women, and children. And Robert Bales is now serving a life sentence in Leavenworth. So like that's the kind of thing is like, do Americans butcher civilians? Absolutely. Do we glorify it as a part of our culture? Do people think Robert Bales is a hero? Absolutely fucking not. And so I think that there absolutely is a tribalist mentality difference here.
In the late 90s, there was this guy who was a mass shooter, went into a area, killed a whole bunch of dudes at a mosque. And proudly so. He murdered a ton of people he was super happy to. He hated Muslims. That guy's gravesite is where a lot of Netanyahu's cabinet holds meetings because it's
Right.
a shrine. The guy who's in charge of security took his wife for their first date to the guy's gravesite, because that's the kind of level psychopath that actually are in charge of Israel right now. And so it's one of the reasons I really push people to not, I really get pissy when people talk about, oh, it's Israel's doing it. It's like Israeli state. Yes, Israelis is a different beast. Like there's a lot of, I'm hesitant to totalize any people, especially when we talk about Hamas in Palestine, because one of the challenges with Hamas and its political structure is there have been other people who've tried to rise up even since Hamas's election. And Israel has not only killed them, but they've also worked with Hamas to imprison them, which is amazing. And they've worked with other groups to have them killed. So you have this really strange thing that Israel has really done their best to encourage a very particular type of leadership inside of Israel over time, as Sunday was talking about the PLO, followed by others, then Hamas. There's a lot of control Israel has over that. And then it's a little bit like the old cowboy movies.
Well,
where
so then this is my question. So another one of my favorite quotes is Clausewitz, which is basically war is diplomacy by other means. And so when I started thinking about it that way, so oftentimes like a lot of military people
It's policy by other means, not diplomacy, but continue.
Excuse me. But a lot of people in the military will get frustrated because we get trained in the game of warfare. So we're taught, you got certain guys here with guns, you got certain guys here with guns. Maybe we got bombs, maybe we got rockets, maybe we got air support, maybe we don't. We move against each other, we kill each other as best we can. We try to minimize our own casualties, et cetera, et cetera. And so what gets frustrating is when you add in policy, like not killing civilians, like operations to do dental work for local people, like paying local militias to not fight you because you're trying to get them over to your side, et cetera, et cetera. That totally like melts the military mind, unless you think like Clausewitz, where you realize that force, war is not a game to be won solely on war's own terms. It's also diplomacy. And so with that being said, what I see here is at least the right wing of Israel's government seems to be playing a game where, like you said, they set up the most nefarious characters possible within these external territories, knowing that they would never be amenable to Israel. And as a result, they will have the pretext through which to exert control. But then here's my thing. So we've been having this conversation for a few hours now. I think I've conceded every reasonable moral objection that President Sunday has had, or any that you would bring up. I think I would concede to.
You heard it here.
However,
fuck you.
However, your moral objections are going to be like a footnote in the process of what is going to happen.
It's going to be a footnote to my dismantling of your misunderstanding of Clausewitz, sir. War is the continuation of policy by other means, not the continuation of diplomacy. War is the way we assert our will over the enemy. Diplomacy is how you come together and will in common. It's a meeting between equals. That's diplomacy. What you're talking about is the opposite.
Pedantic but correct.
Excuse my misspeak.
Which is basically like Sunday's subtitle for his channel is pedantic but correct.
Tell me again how everyone sucks because they misread Deleuze, okay?
Hey, everyone's a fascist. That's the way it works.
I agree. In their hearts. So the question becomes like, so you have your moral objection. It's noted. Now what?
I've got a practical objection.
Go ahead, Sunday.
I've got a practical objection. I think as a consequence of the way this war has been conducted, two things have been done to Israel on a purely cynical level that are going to be really bad for it in the long run. First of all, it's destroyed its reputation among its allies. It's going to be very, very hard for it to draw on its allies in future militarily significant events, which are likely going to result from this. Least of all because of the 2 million people they've just turned into potential terrorists. The second thing is Israel has broken so much faith internally, it is now significantly more fragile than it was before. Most of the assassinations of Israeli political officials that have taken place within Israel have been by Israeli radicals. And so you're in a situation right now where you have videos everywhere of the police beating protesters, beating Orthodox Jews. You have the government very infamously trying to restructure the Constitution so that it has no oversight by the courts. You are looking at a situation in which it is distinctly likely that the Constitution of Israel will be radically changed over the next little while in one way or another, and that's going to destabilize it massively. And there's no faith right now between large, massive chunks of the Israeli population, which is now surrounded by enemies that are now significantly less, let's say, settled than they were before, to use an unfortunate phrase.
Yeah, for me, it's...
Sorry, go ahead.
No,
well,
no,
okay, I'm gonna go.
No, respond to Sunday. He talks forever. We'll
Sorry.
We all do. So, anyways, we're here to yap.
We're talkers.
Whenever I get a yapping comment, I'm like, yeah, it's a fucking stream. Of course we yap. So, anyways, all right, I can hear that. But at the same time, I think that when I look at like tribal psychology, when I look at human beings fundamentally, we tend to be tribal creatures. And so what happens is an internal enemy versus an external enemy. If there is another attack, let's say these unsettled neighbors do another massacre similar to October 7th, that is going to unify the internal politics of Israel for, at minimum, for defense, for existence. Absolutely will. Number two, I'll just point this out, that way I'm not ranting forever. 48 to 67, Israel was like the redheaded stepchild of the global stage. They didn't have any allies. They got like attacked repeatedly, and nobody was willing to sell them guns, aerospace technology. They limited their fuel access. They limited every single kind of technology you could possibly like imagine. And so for that entire time period, Israel was practically alone. So why would they see this as any different? They gained a powerful ally in the United States. They still have a powerful ally in the United States. The United States is probably going to back their play, only try to tempering them a little bit. So what has changed from their perspective?
Well, that's where I think it's worth looking at the last. You're probably about my age. I was born in '80.
I'm late 30s.
Yeah, so I'm a little older, I guess. Fuck. God damn it. Someday I won't be the oldest person on these fucking things.
That's okay. I'm biologically very aged.
So. There we go. There we go. 3 years ago? Like, I want to say like 30 years ago, but the first time I went to a pro-Palestine protest, there were very few people there, and there was a lot of counter-protesters who violently attacked us, spit on us. It was pretty awful. And that was in the 90s. You did not get to say that you were pro-Palestine in the 90s. Not a thing. There just wasn't a position for that. And that continued through the 2000s, through the 2010s, and through the 2020s. And it's this really interesting thing where the idea of supporting Palestine in any meaningful sense, or not wholeheartedly supporting Israel, I think would be the better way to put it, is anathema to Israel's survival. And in the time since October 7th, my assumption with October 7th was that it was like the thing that a lot of terrorists do. They do a horrifying thing, thinking that it's going to yield very good, and then it's this insane backlash they get that ends up, ultimately a Pyrrhic victory where, like, bin Laden sort of won because our economy crashed. We pissed away a lot of money, but he didn't win. Like, no one won. And so I was like, oh, fuck, this is just going to end poorly. Except Biden put limits on a thing very slightly. And it was enough for Ben-Gvir to come out and go, he is a traitor and Biden is Hamas. Biden, who is like, might as well be an Israeli, like as far as his policies in his entire life, he questioned. And that's a thing that's happened in the last 6 months. And so, yes, right now I'm a footnote, but in the last 6 to 9 months, we've had Pelosi and Chuck Schumer both say Netanyahu elections need to happen as soon as possible, if not immediately, to get him out because he's going to get Israel destroyed. We have a lot of voices that were completely supportive that, again, 9 months, 10 months ago, before October 7th, you couldn't question, now are. And there's a lot of them, and it's becoming larger and larger.
Part of this development, though, excuse me, part of this development, though, is actually kind of a personal theory that I've had for a while, which is that if you looked at our relationship with our diplomatic relationship with Germany or Japan during World War II, and if you asked anybody during that time period if we would be good friends in a few decades, the answer would be absolutely the fuck not. Like, nobody would have been able to conceptualize that, like, Germany would have been an economic European powerhouse that we would look to as a leader in Europe. And nobody would really say, like, oh, wow, Japan is going to be the second largest economy within a few decades, and we're actually going to fear them as a rival.
I mean,
so
I mean,
Well,
sort of not true, because we literally, the people in charge of their rebuilding on the US in the military side who actually had, and this is true of Korea as well, post the rebuilding of that, we actually said, and those people said, that we want to build them up to being economic powerhouses that may support us and support our global hegemony. So the goal was, and we did get them to that point. So I'm hesitant.
I think part of that,
Like the
so
common
you don't have to
person,
sign,
sure.
you don't, yeah, sure. That's actually probably accurate. So but with the Middle East and North Africa, I think that war brings about a certain cultural interchange where what can seem like foreign, alien to the point that you just need to massacre them all, you just need to kill them all, they can become familiar, neighborly, more sympathetic,
Not if you're firing
And
rockets from the air, they don't.
I mean, Sudan would be
Okay.
a pretty big disagreement with that.
Oh my God!
Sorry, continue. Sorry, let me finish.
nerds.
Sorry.
So, no, it's okay because you have nerdy tangents and I appreciate that. However, I do want to finish the point. And the point being that I think because of the destabilization of Middle East and North Africa, because of immigration into Europe and the Americas, because Muslims have become more culturally normalized to the point that they're now appearing in pop culture, because, some people will have anecdotal stories about their cool Muslim neighbor versus like the jihadists that are dickheads that kill a few dozen people. We now have the basis for this cultural interchange that, if given enough time and love and economic development, could become the basis for like a healthy, happy relationship. Now, this comes at Israel's expense. However, the truth is that there probably needs to be a calibration between the Middle East and North African interests and Israeli interests. This is actually something that Nixon said openly a few times, was the fact that he had beef with some Israeli advocates in his cabinet because he basically thought that they were advocating solely for Israel's interest at the expense of all other Middle Eastern and North African powers.
I mean, they were.
Yeah.
I mean,
he was like, that's bullshit. We
were.
still want good relationships with Egypt. We still want good... I don't think the Shah was overthrown at that time. So we still want good relationships with Iran and Saudi Arabia. So yeah, we'll help you. We'll support you, but you are not our only interest.
Yeah, we sort of then killed a whole bunch of leaders and cooed some people and did a whole bunch of shit right around that time in the Middle East. Like, there's some of that. Like, I get the point. I get the point that we don't really know where things may go. But I do think that, generally speaking, we are seeing pressures come to a head. I think that's the thing we can definitely agree on, that we're seeing the force of what Israel's doing, and it's, how to put it? The state of Israel is trying to see maybe not how far they can go, but they seem to be so intensely set on what they're doing that they're willing to find out how far we're willing to build out from a cliff before they fall. They're willing to get to that point, and their supporters are as well. And for the first time, we're seeing actually the reverse true, that this pressure point that is building of these two giant masses against each other is going to continue to grow. Because my money is...
Well, who's the alternative mass? That's my question. Because if we're talking about Israel and the United
single
States,
Israeli
I don't see us
state.
breaking the
Again,
faith.
Single Israeli state, which again, we could work across
you're talking about within Israeli politics.
Yeah, Israeli politics is the thing to solve. I think, generally speaking, Netanyahu and his hard right that he brought in because Likud party was losing its power, because, he's a corrupt piece of shit who's going to end up going to jail. And he's basically waging a war to prevent that in order to consolidate his power as he destroys the judiciary, which he's doing in policy as we're talking. So like all this stuff's happening in Israel to consolidate power in this hard right wing. And people are pissed about it there. Like, people are, but they're still supporting, because the narrative in Israel is the hordes are at the gates and we are the only people who will save you from them. Holocaust 2 is the sequel, and it's right around the corner, and we're the ones who are keeping the box office closed so no one can see it. And that mentality of generations being raised like that is getting people to support him. But he's doing all this. So what we end up with is sort of this really fucked up right-wing push. And again, he's destroying the judiciary. It's not a small thing. He's been doing it for 2 years.
So correct me if I'm hearing something wrong, But what you're saying though is that there is an opportunity for the left to use this dissatisfaction in order to get him out of power, in order to moderate the Israeli position, in order to come to better policy. Also, the United States has the ability to exert its influence in order to, basically
I
get
would
a better
love a
result, et
left.
cetera, et cetera.
I would love it from the
However,
left. My argument's actually that there's a liberal
However.
hegemony who can get its power in there. But yes.
Okay. So, however, what I would say to you is that if I was looking at historical parallels, a lot of people had predictions about George W. Bush not being able to get into a second term because of how wildly unpopular Iraq was. A lot of people had positions about like Iraq and the United States military collapsing in 2004 to 2006 because the violence was so fucking bad, and it was bad. But what happened was Bush won, the surge, the Sunni awakening, then our 2011 withdrawal under Obama. Now, of course, ISIS came out of that because it was a brittle fucking mess just waiting for somebody to kick the fucking beam and for it to fall in on itself. But at the same time, the United States was largely like removed from Iraq at that point. But my point is that like there wasn't this right-wing surge in domestic America, or left-wing surge, excuse me, in domestic American politics that was able to beat the wartime incumbent. So my thing is that I think that you can see the momentum on the left wing to get where you want to go. I don't think it's going to be mobilized or have enough momentum to do what you want it to do.
By the same token, there is, if I may very quickly, there is a significant difference between Israel and the United States in this regard, in that the United States had the benefit of all of this taking place very, very far away from it. So the vast majority of people who weren't in the military or weren't, for example, whistleblowers or people on the left who were being completely silenced during all of this, they didn't experience a lot of this in the same way. They experience this as a distant echo. It's not the same as when you have people outside your door crowding in the streets and being beaten by the police because you're protesting the government trying to undermine your entire constitution so we can stay in power indefinitely.
Yeah, I think existential fears about external threats are going to overwhelm the internal concerns about a leader
I agree with that.
power.
But I think there is a lot of more. My point is, because I think you're right. If we're talking about how the marbles are rolling, you're spot on. That's how the marbles are rolling, and they're big, heavy fucking marbles. And Brooks is not pushing a marble. Like that's, I'm not able to get in the way. I am Weird Al in the parody of it being crushed. I'm aware, but again, the thing that's happening instead. See, he doesn't know Weird Al. See, that's the generational thing. So the setup that's happening though, that we have seen and we are seeing, is pressure being placed. All that matters in politics is influence and pressure. That's all. There's no such thing as like free choice by a politician. Pressure and influence. And the pressure that's happening from Saudi Arabia, who Israel needs as a local partner, it's not a question. They need that relationship because it will help them have the right relationships to keep other people from fucking with them. And it'll, it's a big brother in the area. It's a good big brother.
Yeah, but then my point would be they would probably moderate after Rafah. That would be the plan. Now, whether or not Netanyahu or the Likud party or whatever is a part of that calculation,
them doing that,
story.
And then parts of the EU doing it as well, and then parts of Egypt who are moving military doing it, and the US doing it, who is, again, Biden putting any pressure means we're going to see over the course of the rest of this election a lot more noise and a lot more pressure placed. It's going to be actually a really big deal.
Well, if we were trying to, rather than like just waxing philosophical, if we were trying to reach a point that like I would feel like we're kind of orbiting around, it is like the Rafah operation, which for me, like it was almost like a foregone conclusion. Like when you're talking about like military operations, this was Hue City, this is Fallujah, this is all the things that I can think of as far as like military operations in urban terrain, they would call it. So Gaza is not a state. It is a state, but it's not the size of a state. It's a city. It's basically the geographic size of Detroit. So if you had Detroit to the south of your country, and that's where a brutal, terrorist attack came from, you're going to militarily clear every single like geographic square foot. Now it's like squeezing water in your hand, or like a water balloon in your hand. What's going to happen is the pressure is going to escape your hands. It's going to escape to either sides. And then when you relent your pressure, it's going to come back in. But the truth is that you're going to squeeze every single part of that balloon in order to get as much, I'm losing the metaphor, but in order to try to get as much military coverage as possible. Because what's going to happen with the domestic Israelis, if you say, oh yeah, well, there were like a lot of civilians in Rafah, so like we didn't want to risk casualties, so as a result, we didn't conduct operations in there. If Hamas has any kind of military comeback whatsoever a month or two after that fact, then you're going to get crucified on a domestic level because you let Hamas get away by hiding amongst civilians. You didn't have the stones or the balls to finish it.
There is, but that's the reality. There's no defeating Hamas.
Okay, period. But try telling that to the Israeli domestic population. If you just let Rafah sit and then
the easy thing to do, honestly,
do everything that you could.
Well, if you believe, and again, I don't, this is a thing we definitely disagree on. If you believe Israeli special forces are the fucking bee's knees, why can't they go in and handle a handful of people and do what they need to do to get it done?
Basically, because when you're talking about a population concentration, that you were already talking about 2.2 million people in some of the densest terrain possible. When you're talking about 2 million people condensed further into tents or whatever, you walk in to a certain area and you start executing people with like silenced weapons or some shit. You're going to be lucky if a mob doesn't beat you to fucking death by the time you make it 20 feet outside the tent.
So hang on. So just to be clear, so you mean the IDF made the conditions specifically under which it can't defeat Hamas and Rafah?
Using exclusively special forces.
Well, I mean, but again, besides that, how do you ever then kill people? Because again, what you're talking about then is you have to completely kill everybody. It's one of those sort of running jokes. The Obama administration changed the definition of enemy combatant to include any male of fighting age within the strike of a drone, which is a little bit hilarious. Because it's a little bit determinist. It's a pizza delivery guy.
There's a reason why there's a reason why military-aged male became a term in the past decade. Yeah.
It's a pizza delivery guy. Bad day, he was part of it, and it's this setup that puts us in that position.
It doesn't matter.
When you ask,
hold on.
Israel,
let me ask you.
When you ask Israel, how many men over the age of 18 that they've killed that aren't Hamas, they don't have a number because actually the numbers that they give the numbers they say of Hamas are literally, if you take the Hamas authority and you subtract all the men, that's what they say is every man. So it's just everyone that they've killed. They're just fucking that good.
I want to point, I want to point something out to you though from a hypothetical standpoint, because this is like what the war on terror is based upon. Okay, so there are American and Western economic global hegemony is a thing. If you look at our unilateral and multilateral alliances, it's probably representative of 60 to 70 trillion dollars of the world economic power versus maybe like 90 to 100 trillion dollars of economic activity that exists on an annual basis. Okay. So we are 2/3 or 70% of economic activity worldwide. People do not like this structure. They don't like Americans all up in their business. They don't like them telling them what their government's to do. They don't like them dictating how trade is conducted. They don't like any of that shit. So there's always going to be a marginal group that wants to fight your influence out of their country. These people we alternatively call terrorists or freedom fighters. So when it comes to terrorists who are fighting against the American commercial hegemony, oftentimes they target civilians, and the way that they do that is through suicide attacks or just bombing attacks against civilians. If you leave them to their own ends on an annual basis, they will walk into a certain amount of places and they will either bomb and kill a few dozen people, or they will shoot a few dozen people. They're just going to do that. It's almost like a statistical probability that they're going to do that. So you have an option. You can start bombing those people and or shooting those people with special forces, but you yourself will kill a few dozen of people, of whom there will be, a few dozen civilians, right, for every terrorist killed. So your options are kill the terrorist and save a few dozen civilians who are minding their own fucking business, or kill the terrorist and kill a few dozen civilians who are surrounding the terrorist. Which option do you pick? Because you're going to have to deal with the terrorist eventually, one way or the other.
Yeah, sure. And the answer is, I can say with a little bit of personal, meat in the game on this one. Horrible things happen. Killing people to prevent potential horrible things makes you a piece of shit.
So what we should do is we should withdraw, let terrorists conduct their terrorist attacks, and then we should go after them after the fact.
Yes, we prosecute them like criminals,
Well,
which is
because
what we did for a very long time.
Well, here's why. And this actually comes back to why Likud was invested in Hamas being the governor of the Palestinians in the first place, the government rather of the Palestinians in the first place. If you give Hamas the potential, or if you give the Palestinians the potential of becoming more wealthy and more powerful through diplomacy and through constructive collaboration, they'll do it. If you make it so that the only thing that they can do to get any kind of recognition or funding or to function are these nihilistic terrorist attacks, which makes them a proxy of people like Iran, they're going to do that instead. So if you pull back, if you give them more and more space and more incentive to like operate as a peaceable government that's able to collaborate with its neighbors in the region, they will do so because they aren't actually insane. What they are is incredibly corrupt and motivated by whoever's feeding their coffers, which right now is Iran, not Israel. So if you want Hamas, or if you want another party to be able to compete with Hamas, you need to make it so that they have a game that they can play and win at. Because otherwise, literally all you're doing is like Yzma from The Emperor's New Groove. It's like, tell us where the talking llama is, and we'll burn your house to the ground. Right? It's not very compelling.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the rights of freedom
I just
is
watched
bad
The
things
Emperor's New
happen.
Groove, so that hit a little bit harder than it should have.
The price of bad things happening in freedom, they go together. It's the nature of the beast. If people are free to be liberated and emancipated and make choices, they will make choices. Some will be good, some will be bad. You deal with them as they go. It would be very much the same argument when you say things like the slave populations. Inevitably, slaves, when they were freed, would turn on people. They'd kill whites. They'd do crimes. So we need to prevent. We need to do the thing where the man who raises a dog by beating it every day and chains it up, and then one day someone walks by and it growls and goes fierce, and he goes, "See, that's why I chain and beat my dog."
Yeah,
They're the cause of the thing.
Sure, and then we get into different motivations. When we're talking about American War on Terror, though, I'm okay with a certain amount of what Barack Obama would have called CT plus, counterterrorism plus, which is basically law enforcement action, as I think one of you mentioned, but it's in concert with special forces, and it's in concert with like recruiting and developing security forces from the countries that we're working with. So we're not just, bombing some Waziristan in Afghanistan. We're going to Pakistan and we're going to Afghanistan. Not that this worked, but, ideally it would have. And then we're training Afghan and Pakistan special forces to deal with ISIS or Al Qaeda themselves. So,
generally, I'm fine with the training part, but I would say Obama also, Obama's one I have a real big stickler with, because he killed and executed multiple American citizens without trial for guilt that they were never convicted of. And that
I'm with you.
Horrifying.
I'm going to leave you ladies to talk for a bit. I'm going to eat my dinner. If you don't mind, I'll be right back. Keep talking. I'm still here.
We ladies.
Okay. I will. I am probably going to hang out for another 15 minutes, and then I will be out.
But he'll want to be here at the end, so I'll give him 15, I guess.
Okay, so so basically, I understand the only reason why I give any grace to Obama in that circumstance. So from a procedural standpoint, horrifying, like extrajudicially killing an American, outside of our own borders,
multiple,
with no due process. Well, I mean, it was a guy and his son. So the guy, basically was Al Qaeda. I think he was Al Qaeda, but he could have been ISIS.
Let's say he was a gigantic piece of shit.
Well, not only a piece of shit, he was actually like the propaganda arm of. Was it Al Qaeda or was the Islamic State? I fucking forget. He worked for one of those people.
I want to say he was Al Qaeda. But it was an offshoot of it. There were some funny stories.
Hold on. Well, ISIS started out of the ashes of Al Qaeda in Iraq, but U.S. American killed.
There's a really great
Obama.
book that goes through like the entirety of the founding. Yeah, Al-Awlaki.
Anwar Al-Awlaki and his son. So Anwar Al-Awlaki, jihadist who was killed in 2011 in Yemen. He was working for Al Qaeda. Okay, sorry. It was just that entire time period is blending
Still an
together at this
American
point because it's been a while ago.
citizen.
So the reason why he was killed was because he actually started out as a relatively peaceful, moderate imam who was saying like 9/11 has nothing to do with us. We're all about peace, justice, love. We're as American as cherry pie. We're all about this American life. But he started studying Qutb. He started studying Osama. He started studying jihadist texts, and as a result, he was convinced by them. He goes out to Iraq and Yemen, and he starts effectively being their propaganda wing. And what he does, or one of the things he does, is he starts justifying through theology terrorist attacks. One of his famous arguments was the fact that when Muhammad, peace be upon him, shot a catapult into a city that he was sieging and he accidentally killed civilians, that was necessary in order to break the siege of the city. And so since there was a just cause, you could kill civilians towards a just cause as long as you were aiming towards a just cause. And
yeah,
then
he also ended up
analogized that to
pushing and continuing Qutb's sort of belief that there was I can't remember the exact term because I don't speak the language, but that they're mistaken people. They've had the illusion pulled over our eyes, Muslims who have been fooled by the West and therefore also are valid targets. Yeah, no, he's a piece of shit. But again,
there's also an argument for God. There's a theology for.
What bomb did he set off? Yeah.
Well, he was. Hold on, we'll address that in a second. But he was part of the theological justification for being able to kill believers too, though, is that in Islam, this life is a mirage. It's not even real. This is the test that God puts in front of us in order to see how we're going to conduct ourselves.
Are you going to pass it or not? Yeah.
Yeah. Are you going to pass it or not? And if you die and you're Muslim and not just Muslim, because being nominally Muslim is not enough. You have to, believe in God the last day, that Muhammad is a messenger, and that
easiest way in is the martyr life, all of that stuff. Like
you have to do good works.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to do good works as well. And so, so with all of that being said, if you kill a believer, it actually doesn't matter because they're going to be in paradise. They're going to be in a plane of reality that's more real than reality. And if you kill a non-believer, then fuck him. He was a non-believer and he was committing sin and idolatry in the land of Muslims. Yep. So this whole justification, you asked, did he plant a bomb? Did he shoot? Did he kill? Did he do any of this kind of shit? And no, but he was in a foreign nation traveling in the company of people who were building the bombs, who were organizing the fighters, who were doing the financing, and he was actively recruiting and proselytizing to this terrorist organization. This is the last person I give a fuck about the United States killing.
Oh, so really? Because to me, one of the sort of general, real important things is that American citizens have rights, regardless of their giant piece of shitness. But if it's okay for us to murder people, as long as they're a big enough piece of shit.
Murder.
I mean,
so for instance,
him, right? He's dead.
Well, hold on. So for instance,
did he have a trial?
No, but I almost guarantee you that they created some kind of warrant system in order to authorize the drone strike. There was some kind of
they asked Obama, and Obama said, "I'll kill him." So again, is there a trial?
Hang on, wait, slow down. Really? So you're cool with the State Department just deciding autonomously, this person's guilty, we've decided we don't need a trial for an American citizen?
Literally what's not allowed the executive branch to do.
Well, I mean, if he's not in the United States and he's in the active action of advocating for terrorism, then yeah, fuck him.
So if I go over and I'm in, name a fucking country. Let's say it's somewhere we hate. Let's say I'm in Yemen.
Let's say you're in Canada.
Let's say I'm in Yemen, we're actually having a bad day with Yemen as the U.S. And I say, you know what? Fuck America. They deserve anything they get. I should be killed. Or it's cool.
If you're traveling with and actively aiding and supporting a terrorist organization that's killing people,
hang on. Yeah. Just to be clear. So, Connor, you would actively support the United States deciding to assassinate Haz from Infrared right now when he's in Russia?
I mean, that sounds great to me, right?
Who's that?
I did not say that.
Haz? Jackson Hinkle? Come on.
Oh, infrared Haas?
Yeah. He's right now in an enemy country that we have sanctions against, preaching about how we need to be overthrown. So he should
Wait,
and
is he a
can be
U.S.
killed.
citizen?
I think so.
99% sure he is.
I mean, if he's
American.
not a U.S. citizen, I guess there's no problem.
If he's not
is
a
there?
citizen, then definitely.
So can we kill Snowden?
All right, hold on. Let's
Can we
qualify this.
Can
I
we
need
kill
to stop
Snowden?
memeing. Let's not.
Trump.
Let's qualify this.
The thing that matters.
Okay.
The thing
Hold
that
on.
matters underneath all of it, because we can keep going back and forth to like, because
No. I want to specify, but continue your thought.
The question for me is, at a base level, do we have the right to do anything we want in any country with any citizen and any person? Because we've decided, and so a handful of people that have been voted to decide, and a lot of people who weren't voted in, decide that a person dies or a group dies. And that's a fine existence that certainly will never blow back on us or cause further strife. Feels like
No, it kind of already is, but
I mean, blowback is the term the CIA invented for what happened in the Middle East and what we got for 9/11 and what honestly Israel got. The term is blowback, by the way. Like across the board, blowback's a wonderful word. The CIA has used a lot for terms like this. When we do things to an impoverished, brutalized group, and then at some point they come back on us in tenfold, and then we act shocked, like clutch our pearls and go, "How could you ever?"
So that. We're getting back to Clausewitz, so I need to finish. I need to specify my my extrajudicial killing of American citizens outside of the border. So within the borders of the United States, obviously you should do arrest, right? Because they're within the United States. You have plenty of law enforcement. There's no logistical concerns there. You can arrest them, give them a trial, et cetera, et cetera. Outside of the United States, you have extradition countries, you have allies, all that kind of shit. You have state entities that you can work with, like Interpol in Europe, for instance. You can literally put out an arrest warrant through European law enforcement. They can arrest the person. They can extradite them back to the United States. You should work through that infrastructure. When we're talking about, let's say, Waziristan in Afghanistan, right? So it's isolated, remote. The local people are hostile. There's no government entity that's capable of getting this person. This person is accused of XYZ ABC, actively aiding and abetting a terrorist organization. I think that if it is possible at all to do a special forces raid in order to capture and detain that person and bring them back, that should be done. However, if you have an argument for why that's not possible, then I don't necessarily have a problem with a drone strike, as long as you can actually document the fact that they are aiding and abetting a terrorist organization.
But you see what you've done, though. You've made it permissible for the State Department to order your assassination as an American citizen, to completely erase your rights to make you an outlaw, on the grounds that another country,
if I travel to another country, hang on.
I got that. But on the grounds that another country's institutions don't match this set of criteria you've provided, and if it's inconvenient.
Yep.
Okay.
So I would ask then, would someone who's related to the leadership of Gaza or Yemen be justified in killing you?
If there was a crime that I had committed,
you have talked
Hamas,
about why it's okay for Israel to do horrifying. You've talked about it, and you've talked about how Hamas is at fault, and why these things are necessary, and why the death count is acceptable.
And you're paid politically, I believe, to do work for the Democratic Party, which is currently in power. which is
we're in an enemy nation right now with the people who are funding. Like, am I a target then? Justifiably,
I'm platforming him, so technically I am too.
Yeah, I was about to say
we're in a group. Okay. I'm like Al-Maki's son, who was totally worth killing.
My soul is prepared. Connor is yours.
Okay, yes, excellent use of a quote. Okay, so allegedly they weren't targeting his son; they were targeting the guy who was with his son. But anyways, I digress. So hold on. So in order for this analogy to be correct, I would have to be under the jurisdiction of Hamas in the first place, not a foreign national. Then I would have to have committed some crime against them. Then they would have to have no way of extraditing me for some kind of legal procedure within their territory that they have the authority to do.
How can they not just claim all of these things? Like they don't. There's no jury.
What,
there's no multiple
what
people. They just
crime have I committed? Do you have a statute?
Well, no, Connor. The point is that if we're talking about information about a person that can only be acquired through military intelligence, then the proof of this person's guilt is literally just the State Department's word.
Well, unfortunately, Anwar al-Awlaki published all of his work and also did video work that's available and viewable by the public. So
all speech, right? Just making sure, just to say again, he didn't do anything, just speech, right?
Yeah, we still arrest people for speech all the fucking time if they advocate for crime.
Well, what if they
particularly murder?
Like the famous rappers who have gone to jail multiple times for talking about killing cops. Agreed. We do that often. Some of them
have. In California, they almost put a rapper in jail specifically for his rap album.
Okay, but slow down.
Advocating for crime, and they proved that he was participating in the organization's criminal enterprise.
Okay, so if a rapper who has made music about killing Americans,
cops,
goes to, I agree, not true Americans, but for the sake of argument, okay, if a rapper who has made music about killing Americans goes to Yemen or somewhere where you can't extradite them officially, or you don't have like the kinds of diplomacy with that or whatever, or it'd be difficult to send in special forces to collect them, you're okay with just out of hand not nuking them, but like drone striking them just like that? Because
no, of course there has to be like an imminent threat of death or great bodily harm to others, right? Like, so for instance, let's say, hold on. Well, yeah, he's working with fucking Al-Qaeda while they're active.
But with
hold on, let me follow in your analogy, and I'll make your analogy work better.
Okay. All right.
Let's say Assata Shakur. This is a perfect example. Tupac Shakur's mom. Okay. Assata Shakur was a pro-black activist in the 70s and 80s. She was involved in a gunfight with law enforcement. Law enforcement officers were killed in that gunfight. She escaped to Cuba, and she was an anti-government activist there for decades. Let's say that Assata Shakur was making routine videos and blog posts and newspaper articles advocating for more people stateside to kill cops. And not only that, she was with the Castro regime, and the Castro regime was giving her money and time and energy and influence in order to get weapons and arms back into the United States of America in order to kill more cops or government officials. I would have no problems. I'm almost done.
Go on.
I would have no problems with a special forces raid to apprehend and or kill her on Cuban soil. And if she was in a remote part of Cuba that was like some mountainous region controlled by tribal groups or some shit, and it wouldn't like directly kill the Castro regime, yeah, drone strike her ass. I wouldn't give a fuck.
I think any decision that erodes the rights of any American to due process endangers the entire citizen body at once. You are opening the door to every single American being targeted. You just disagreed with me. You're opening the door.
You literally just disagreed. You just said that there's no due process with that. So you obviously don't agree that
there is a due process.
No, if there's no judicial
due process is not there is a method by which a singular body without oversight makes a decision to kill somebody. Due process is there is an invocation of the public to scrutinize it and make a judgment. Right.
Well,
so a person who was found guilty.
We know about Anwar al-Awlaki. We do know about his son.
He did not have a trial.
Organs.
He did not have a trial. As far as the American public is concerned, in any legal sense, no, we don't know anything. We never actually looked at it as a. I'm a Canadian. What the fuck am I talking about? You guys never actually looked at it as a people and made a judgment. You had no decision about that. What do you mean?
I did personally.
How about the Central Park Five? We all knew that. Why not just kill them?
Well, I think some of the Central Park Five should probably still be in prison. So,
okay,
yeah, you're party to a gang rape of a woman who's knocked unconscious. Yeah, you should probably stay in prison.
And that was proven in court with evidence that wasn't fabricated and
fabricated. Do we want to sit here? We're on the Middle East and North Africa. Do we want to?
No, because again, do we want to
pull up the Netflix documentary?
No, hang on, very quickly, Brooks. No, the point is when you say they did this and that, the reason why you have due process and the reason why you have a trial is because it's not enough for some guy to say, "I'm sure he did that. I'm sure this stuff was going down look at what he wrote, it's obvious. He's kind of squinty. He's obviously doing something shifty. That's not enough. People lie about that all the time. Like, for example, what if, hypothetically, let's say we weren't even talking about killing them. Let's say we were talking about just persecuting them because they were maybe softly aligned with an enemy power. Like, maybe we called them pinkos or something, and maybe we...
Why don't we call them January Sixers?
What? We're not assassinating January Sixers.
No, they're all getting trials.
They're all getting trials. They're going into court. Their rights are being respected.
Okay, sorry. Continue with your analogy. I was going to take.
No, I want to know how that works.
I am indeed also curious. Please elaborate.
I'm super curious.
Okay. So yeah, all right. So let's say that Donald Trump tried a coup d'état on January 6th and he failed.
Okay.
And let's say rather than standing trial and staying here for his criminal enterprise or for his criminal attempts to usurp the election, he escaped to the Isle of Elba, recouping his strength and trying to do diplomatic back channels. And let's say he was encouraging his supporters domestically in order to riot and commit terrorist attacks. Would you have a problem with the special forces raid in order to go get Donald Trump? Would you have a problem with him potentially get? Would you have
him or kill
drone
him?
Strike? Well, I don't give a shit.
No. If you're trying to capture him and he fights back and in the course of that he dies, so be it. But you do not authorize him to be assassinated by the military.
Nope. It's even more important actually that he go on trial so that way that process can be seen and everyone can know what happened.
Yeah, it's going to boil down to this. You guys are going to keep asking me to bite bullets about killing people, and I'm going to keep saying yes.
I feel like this is surreal. So, like, we've got two very radical leftists here defending Trump from arbitrary assassination against a conservative.
Well, it's not arbitrary, is it?
But definitionally is. Who's choosing? Who's choosing to kill him?
The executive branch of the United States in concert with all the other organs of the federal government?
Well, no, because the organs of the federal government includes the courts, Connor.
The judicial branch explicitly, and the laws about the separation of powers and how it's written into the Constitution refuses the executive branch from anything like this.
By the way, this is the problem with Israel, because Likud is trying to make the judicial branch not have oversight over the executive.
Correct.
Okay.
So it's becoming a tyranny.
The elimination of the judicial branch.
It's becoming a tyranny. It ceases to be a republic at that point.
It's what Trump is trying to do with the recent Supreme Court case, where he actually literally had his lawyers argue that if he decided to kill someone for fun, that's fine.
Yeah, they would have to. Well, hold on, because this is actually an interesting thing. They flip it where basically he's saying, I would not have to justify the murder of this person beforehand to anyone. I could do it, and then it's up to the courts to prove after the fact that I committed some kind of wrong, and until then, I will have all of my presidential authority. That was his lawyer's argument.
No, it's very explicitly, Elena Kagan asked, so the president can have someone killed for any reason was the word she used, and that he cannot be prosecuted for that. And he said, yes, that is what we are saying. This is the exact words.
Yeah. Hold on. Until he's impeached, until he's tried. The impeachment is still a process that the Trump's lawyers weren't denying. So it's not a 1-to-1. It's just an interesting thing, the due process flip in that situation. But let me articulate it. The thing is, in this situation, assassination or killing is not the first step. It's like the 50th. Like, you gather intel, you confirm that they're active, you make sure that there's an imminent threat to death or great bodily harm. Then you see whether or not you can do the special forces mission. Then if you can't do the special forces mission, then you would resort to a drone strike.
And I think
if you miss any one of those steps,
I have to ask, he was speaking. Where is the imminent threat? So again, let's go with you as a soldier.
Out with jihadist terrorists who are actively killing people.
Those words matter. No, the words matter. You as a soldier go into a mosque, and there is a man standing up there saying these awful things. You're okay to engage and kill him on the spot.
If
that's
there
allowed.
Are a bunch of jihadist terrorists
no one's
him,
armed.
And he's saying shoot the.
Hang on, let him reply, bro.
Then I'll take him to Guantanamo.
You will? How would you do that? That's not how that works.
I would fucking detain the. What are you talking about?
You would detain him.
You think that
I'm
we
asking,
haven't
you would
kidnapped
shoot and kill him.
specifically
No,
ideological
you
recruiters
don't
for
take
terrorist
anyone
organizations?
No, of course you don't take anyone to
Brooks,
Guantanamo.
your mic is sideways.
My point is,
I don't know what you're saying.
You walk in. Can you kill him? That's it. I'm not asking detain. We're not talking. We're not shooting.
Armed, no.
So why is it
hang on. Wait. How do you determine he's unarmed with a drone when you're firing with a drone strike? Do you mean if he's like ever been armed in his life, or do you mean
he generally was always unarmed? By the way, like he wasn't that guy.
Well,
I think Connor even knows he wasn't a guy who walked around with a gun.
But you guys are kind of missing the thing that I feel like is illogical. Okay. So he's actively hanging out, financing, and recruiting for a terrorist organization that is killing people.
Okay, but to be clear, when we're talking about financing and recruiting, what you have to go off of are associations and writings, and you are inferring positive action for this organization. To whom are you responsible to prove that your judgment about this person is correct?
Okay, so if you're talking about designing the federal government to be able to carry out these strikes in a way that actually has checks and balances, I'm okay with that. We'll figure it out.
What's amazing though, Connor, is they've done that already. You've got a court system that can judge these people.
We have the system in place. We just don't use it.
Hold on, but you also understand that like drone strikes specifically are reviewed by courts and by lawyers and all that kind of shit for legality.
They're reviewed by people on the side of those doing it. They're not. A defense attorney doesn't argue with the judge of why the guy shouldn't be killed. It's not. It's
I have to do a bunch of fucking research on drone
feel free.
strike
The White House's lawyers argue why it's legal for Obama to do these things. There's no.
Hold on. But you also understand that there's organs of the DoD. Hold up. We have to be specific. Okay.
Yeah.
So within the Air Force, which is one of the groups that's conducting airstrikes, the other one being the CIA, which is probably shadier and with less oversight. The Air Force has a collateral damage calculation of who they can take out. And so if there is a target that is deemed through an intel packet to have a certain threat level or whatever, they calculate that against the amount of civilians that are in the area, and then they decide whether or not to do a strike. Right. Also, part of that calculation is whether or not ground forces are available in order to do that. If ground forces are available, then they're prohibited from doing the strike. If there's too many civilians, they are prohibited from doing the strike. This is all within the realm of the executive branch, with, to my knowledge, no court like necessarily holding these people accountable to these decisions, but because they're good faith actors, they're still following those procedures as much as possible.
I agree with everything you said.
Okay. So if you want some kind of concession, like each strike should have all of its documentation reviewed by a court that is capable of holding these people criminally liable.
No, respectfully, Connor.
Sure.
Yeah, Connor, you're missing the point entirely. The point is this. The line between you living under a tyranny in which you can be arbitrarily targeted for destruction by some autonomous body that has decided with zero oversight that you are an enemy to be destroyed, and you being in a republic with rights is precisely that those rights are inviolable. If you make it the case that on the basis of an organization that is just really vibing, that we're good faith, we've got lawyers who are looking at this, they think if this were to be put before a judge, this would be a good decision or whatever, but with no defense for the person or whatever. If you cross that line to that now being the condition of an American citizen being killed, then you actually don't have rights anymore. You have rights at the pleasure of that body, which now technically has zero oversight, which means now they, at will, can take all of your rights and just dispense with them entirely. And because the nature of rights is that they're kind of categorical, they apply to every single citizen, there's no difference between you and the guy that was drone striked, that endangers everybody. It is worth actually endangering however many soldiers you have to, if you are dedicated to doing so, to extract this person bodily and making him stand trial, than to do so, because you are actually endangering your entire republic then. Like, that's an existential threat that you've generated yourself.
And it goes back to to try to bring it back all the way, because I think
Mhm.
we've strayed hilariously down multiple rabbit holes, which is always fun. I like rabbit holes.
Well, it's related to the war on terror, so I'm good with
Yeah,
it.
getting it back to what's happening with Israel and Gaza, and ultimately why we're in the position we're in, is Israel is an apartheid state within what they call Israel, but also obviously within the West Bank and Gaza. And so when we talk about the ability for Israel to kill whoever they want, thousands and upon thousands, tens of thousands of people, and then claim justification how they choose, and then don't claim justification otherwise, and there being no issue there, we run into exactly what we've got, which is a lot of innocent people, probably some bad assholes. There's probably Anwar al-Awlaki, like some dickhead. Sure, that like I probably am fine with a handful of these guys not being on Earth, but 35,000 of them, and Israel freely doing this and then breaking down their own government as Netanyahu has done to ensure that he has no further oversight, puts us in a position where that ends in only one way. And it ends over time, and they may have all the strength to survive for very long, but it ends poorly for everybody.
Okay.
Put another way. It's not that we want this guy alive. It's that he takes other things besides himself with him into hell. Like you've made it now the case that this is now a thing that can be done. That was an unbreachable line before, for a reason. Like
unfortunately, I'm understanding everything that you guys are saying procedurally. Yeah. I understand everything that you're saying principally.
But are you understanding it directionally? Sorry, go on.
I would have to think about that. So I just think we live in this world already. We live in this world right now.
Agreed.
For now?
For now.
I do not see any of this bouncing back. And sorry, let me just not rebut, but let me expand something, that way your audiences don't think I'm totally fucking retarded. Excuse my ableist slur. Totally stupid. So what is to bar the federal government from arbitrarily assassinating somebody within the United States, because we've set this precedent where if you're a dangerous enough person or a difficult enough person to apprehend, then we can kill you, and we have minimal oversight in reference to this. We can just claim you're a terrorist, we can kick down your door, and we can execute you, or we can hit you with the sweet little Hellfire drone missile. Somebody called it a Ginsu Hellfire. I think that's a perfect name. Basically, they took the Hellfire missile, they removed the explosive payload, and they replaced it with blades. So it's basically a sword missile. So what's to stop the federal government from hitting me with a sword missile? Well, right now, what I would hope is that I'm a citizen within the Republic. I'm not advocating for mass violence. I'm not advocating for murder.
Hope.
There are courts and local law enforcement. I am hoping. I mean, we're all hoping.
But that's what you got to defend yourself now, is hope. You're keeping your fingers crossed that they won't dislike you too much.
You too. If anything, I could go on a right-wing tirade about the abuses of civil liberties in Canada based off of like resistance to the COVID restrictions and how the truckers were so poorly treated in authoritarian ways that would make Donald Trump blush. I could do that, but I don't want to.
Well, hang on.
Speaking of Trump real quick, because what happens is we get into, just as a very particular use case of the problem we're talking about, is there was a Portland protester who we believe probably killed a guy in the middle of one of the
admitted to it on tape, and the marshals went out there and he allegedly had a gun and the marshals killed him.
Yeah, but Trump bragged.
And Donald Trump begged about it being a death squad.
Yeah. And where there was no inquiry, by the way. And like in general, there just wasn't. People have sued over it and it just was refused. It puts us in a very precarious position. Do I think there was a death squad? Probably not. But now we are in a position where are we? Like, and that's
sure.
dicey as
listen,
shit.
I'm all for your guys' alarmism. And you know what? We're probably going to need people like you with your perspectives in order to maintain a republic. I just think that with these specific examples, I can't rouse any emotion.
Well, what if somebody disagrees though, and disagrees really hard, and that person happens to work in the State Department, and I happen to be on vacation one day? You see how it gets a little bit
Are
like...
you vacationing in Yemen? Are you hanging out with Canadian extremists who want to take over the United States of America? Because if you are, and you're sitting in a cafe, chewing on cot, and you're talking about how you're gonna...
Who's a Canadian...
So we need to remember there are places we're
Brooks.
not allowed to go.
Who's an extremist who wants to take over Canada?
Me.
Like what if for example, just hypothetically, what if hang on. What if I, as an example, hung around a bunch of French guys, okay? And maybe a bunch of those French guys were in the Quebec government. Maybe a bunch of those people in the Quebec government were in the Bloc de Québécois. Maybe they had a few friends in the FLQ, okay?
Yeah.
How close do I have to be to a mailbox where the Canadian government's allowed to shoot me?
I would say that if you're hanging out, I'm assuming this is like a domestic terror organization or like
it is. Quebec separatism. There were a couple bombings, yeah.
Okay. Did those bombings kill anyone?
Vive Quebec Libre. Sorry, as you were.
Did they kill anyone?
They did.
They did. They killed a member of government, actually. They captured him and tortured him.
So if you become and what's the name of the organization?
FLQ.
FLQ.
Yeah.
So let's say
I can't help but giggle whenever I've heard that for some reason. I don't know why.
You hang out, a bunch of French partisans. It's
FLQ. FLQ.
All right. So let's say that you join FLQ.
It sounds better. The acronym sucks. It's the Front de Libération. Sorry, continue.
Okay. So let's say the Front Liberation de Quebec. You join them. You become their propagandist. You are wildly popular. You're posting your manifestos online. Thousands of people love the fact that you are advocating for French, I don't know, identitarianism in the Canadian province of whatever the fuck. And also the FLQ is actively killing people. Let's say that you and your friends take off into the wilds of Canada. You are very difficult to track down, very difficult to trace. Let's say that there's a FLQ sympathetic city at the Northern fucking Lights. I don't know what the fuck is up there anyways. So you're up there, you're doing your thing. And on top of that, you're actively posting videos and shit. If the Canadian government had all of this intel, it was known, et cetera, et cetera. Now, maybe they should go to a court first. And the court should say, yes, there's sufficient evidence to believe that President Sunday is an active member of FLQ and that there's imminent threat of death or great bodily harm. And on top of that, a special forces raid is not appropriate because it's going to have too much collateral damage. If they decide to drone strike you with a fucking sword missile, yeah, I'm not going to give a fuck.
Okay, but see, the problem is that now, as a consequence of that, literally, because this is exactly the judgment that the Israeli government is doing. The only difference between a Gazan and an Israeli is that an Israeli's rights are respected by the government. As soon as you cross that boundary and it's like, oh, okay, we're now making a utilitarian calculus as to whether we decide to respect your rights.
Their rights are not respected by the government. They killed multiple on October 7th knowingly, and they've had that policy in the past of not allowing hostages to be taken and instead killing them on the way out.
Sure.
Like, they've never cared. The Israeli government has never given a fuck about Israelis.
No.
Okay, but pretending that they did.
You're making a miscalculation here. Right. The miscalculation for the, what is it? Like the Solomon Protocol or some shit? I forget what they call it, where they're willing to kill their own people because, they don't want them to be captured. So the whole point about that is that you're denying leverage to the enemy. You are also giving your people a quick death rather than being tortured and raped to death.
Well, actually, you're doing something a little different, though. You're actually denying your people their peoplehood, because that's what civil rights are. They are your legal existence as a thing.
Are we talking about kidnapped Israeli hostages that are being shot by IDF forces?
We are also talking about them, yes.
Sure.
Because it's the exact same calculus. Okay. The only difference is that you switched it a little bit. So instead of they're too difficult to extract as criminals, they're too difficult to extract as victims. That's the only distinction.
Yeah.
But you have still completely depersoned them. They are no longer a part of the Israeli people. They are now enemy material that you must deny to them. So you've just, okay, but they're not, though. They're Israeli citizens with rights. Otherwise, what is the only democracy in the Middle East? Like, what is this?
There isn't one.
No, this is what you would expect of an Assad, right?
No, we've always had exigent circumstance. No, we've always had exigent circumstance exceptions to due process and civil rights. Always.
Then why was this an event? Why was this crossing a line? Why was this new? Why was assassinating an American citizen abroad?
What was an event?
The assassination
Anwar al-Awlaki?
Yes.
Yeah, let's just go back to October 7th.
Because there was
How was that
very
exigent
little process.
circumstances? How is that exigent circumstances in any
How
capacity?
is terrorists crossing into your border, slaughtering people, and taking hostages not exigent circumstances?
Well, because we're talking about the
To kill your
justification.
own people.
We're talking about the justification for killing the hostages. We're not talking about the justification for killing Hamas.
Okay.
Hamas. Here's the difference.
And?
Hamas don't have rights in Israel. Hamas aren't persons. You can kill Hamas with impunity as an Israeli citizen without any kind of without being actively in the military. You can shoot a Hamas agent. No one's going to do anything to you. But if you're an Israeli citizen, the IDF can't decide. They look like they're taking you away. Sorry, right? They can't.
I mean, isn't that literally the policy of the government? You're saying they can't. They did.
Well, yeah. But that's kind of the point.
Isn't that their stated policy?
Well,
that's the fun part is they claim it's not.
And there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that because policy, which is the decision of a government, it's an attitude of the government, actually shouldn't legally be able to contravene the constitutional rights of the citizens.
Have you read Israel's constitution?
Does Israel's constitution? Does Israel's constitution
do they not have exceptions?
They don't have an exception for this. No. No, the Hannibal.
Hold on. I don't know that you can say that confidently because I don't think that you've necessarily read Israel's, constitution. But at the same time, I'm going
to say they don't. Yeah, I think it's a safe bet.
I'm going to say that it's not a safe bet because as a country that is like founded essentially during wartime, also with a pretty decent history of collectivism, I would say that individual rights are probably an important part of Israeli society, but it's probably not an American or European conception of individual rights.
Do you believe that they actually have in their constitution the ability to...
hang on, slow down. I got a question for you. Connor. What's the Israeli constitution called? Can you answer me that?
No, I can't.
They don't have one.
Well, there you go. You can't violate the constitution.
No, but you can though, because you can still have rights, and there can still be
Bill of Rights.
Well, the funny thing is actually, historically, a lot of nations didn't have written constitutions because a constitution doesn't actually refer to a specific document with a set of rules and exceptions. What a constitution refers to is the body of common law that develops over time. And if it includes, for example, rights...
The Samson Protocol?
It's not a stated...
That's not a part of the constitution.
Hannibal directive, by the way.
So hold on. So somebody said Samson Protocol in the chat, but I think Samson option.
Samson option is
Israel gets destroyed, they'll
nuke
nuke the planet. Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Mutually assured destruction.
There's another one where they basically say like we won't let civilians get taken as hostages.
Yeah, but that's
directive named after the invasion.
Which, by the way,
Hannibal.
we're kind of debating like a rumor. You guys are saying it definitely happened on October 7th. I'm not saying that it did, but
it's
okay. Well, then there you go.
But moreover, it's happened elsewhere, and this is a military ordinance. This is not a constitutional thing. This is not a thing that's been established in law. Can you imagine that? Like, here's a question for you. If they can already do this, if they can just decide arbitrarily, hey, we've decided that it's now legal to just rob random Israeli citizens of rights if we decide that they might be possibly being taken hostage and it might be difficult to get them back. Can you imagine that playing out through the courts? Can you imagine Likud needing to downgrade the court's role in politics if they could already? Like, it seems a bit redundant at that stage, doesn't it? Because now the rights of Israeli citizens...
Sorry, wait. What's the hypothetical? I'm missing the hypothetical.
He's just talking about the realities that if they have this supposed right, then why would they need to disempower the judiciary in order to maintain their power and do these awful things? And the reason is because they don't have these rights, and they have to disempower the judiciary, who began pushing their way in post this invasion in order to gain some more control and leverage, because that's how politics works. And so they disempowered the judiciary because, again, Netanyahu doesn't want to go to jail.
Is this not the flow of common law that you were talking about, where there isn't an articulated constitution? It's a series of like cultural norms and laws that are revolving through time and circumstance?
Well, no, because it's not, common law is not just a series of norms. It's not a vibe. Common law is a collection of rulings that have been elaborated upon over time. It is not like a feel.
So what's the ruling on the Hannibal directive?
What's the ruling on the Hannibal directive? If it was never put up to the courts, then there isn't a ruling.
It never was.
Okay. Well, then I think you should talk to some civilians in Israel, and you should say, "Hey, listen, your family member got murdered."
Yeah. Well, there's
on the way out by IDF.
Yeah. Well, something interesting kind of happens when you try to do that in Israel. The cops beat you up in the street.
Yeah,
they do. Even the most hardcore Hasidic Jews, they just fucking slam into the ground. They don't give a shit.
Like on camera, they'll see cameras around. They'll just beat them. I can send you videos if you like.
This is no, I don't need it. So hold on. So this is the thing. Like I kind of take the world as it is, and I'm not a libertarian. Yes, I'm not a libertarian, and in some ways, I'm like a capital L liberal. But I'm more of a communitarian, meaning that I believe that there are individuals and there's a collective, and that like society functions when there's a negotiation of like rights and privileges between the individual and the collective. I think that's how like almost all of societies have functioned for all of time, regardless of their stated ideology. So when you're saying like Israelis have this crazy fucking policy in which they shot their own citizens while they were being kidnapped by terrorists, it's like, no, that makes sense to me. They evolved in like a desperate, dangerous, fucked up place where there's a small chance that you're going to get kidnapped and raped and murdered and mutilated. And so as a result, they said, we would rather deny our enemies leverage during negotiations and also spare our citizens grisly deaths. And this is going to be our stated policy. Now, if you want to take that up with the Israelis and say, "Hey, that's a fucked up policy,"
no. It was
go ahead. But that's no skin off of my ass.
Hang on, no. The logic is not to save them from grisly deaths. Okay, these are not mercy killings. The logic is to prevent them from being used.
How
as
do you
hostages.
know that?
Because we know why the people who originally started the Hannibal Directive said so. It has nothing like whatever justification you may add. They explicitly didn't want to be
wild. You guys just asserted something wild. President Sunday said definitively it has nothing to do with mercy killing. And then you just said that the people who created the Hannibal Directive explicitly said that it's not mercy killing.
Correct.
Please find me that.
All right, we can do that.
Give me a minute. I wonder if Rashid Khalidi actually has it in the
wild
index.
to me. And if Israeli general, so by the way, this is
it wouldn't be a general. It would be a leak.
Empathy.
No. Here's the problem, Connor. You don't understand. This is one of those things that's secret military doctrine. We only know about it because of leaks. This is not the kind of thing again that has any existence in law at all.
What source would you trust? Because again, I don't want to get in the position of sending something or sharing something.
I don't care. Give me a rumor one. I'll take a rumor one just to even see it. And Christian Valeris, by the way, how long is this combo? We're live. We're having an interesting conversation. We're yapping. Although I did plan on being off about 20 minutes ago, so we are going to wrap
as long as the invasion of Rafa will take.
We're going to be here. We're going to be here live covering through Rafa. All right, hold on.
We kind of are.
So let me give you my, before you give me documentation, let me tell you my inference. Okay. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying I'm correct. I'm telling you my inference. So in the past, Israelis have been taken hostage and they've also been brutally murdered. There are stories of like children, and this has also happened to Arab children, by the way, but there are stories of like 10 and 12-year-old Jewish boys being kidnapped, mutilated, sliced up, beaten with hammers, etc., to death. That is a horrible way to go, to be powerless in the clutches of your enemy and to not be instantly killed, but to be ripped apart a piece at a time.
Well, so look, I've seen Starship Troopers. I know how it's done.
No,
I get it.
So my presumption is that not only do you want to deny the enemy leverage, but also you want to grant a quick death to somebody who might suffer in the worst ways imaginable. That is my presumption and my inference. I am happy to be proved wrong.
How's it going, Brooks?
Slow.
Yeah.
So
everything's in Hebrew.
I specifically want to, it's a nightmare. I'm trying to get specifically to Yossi Peled, who's the guy I'm aware of who first stated it in a war in like the 80s. And his use was particular, and I'm trying to get his words specifically. I'm unaware of anyone else. I don't think it was from before that. Anyone can correct me as a thing.
Oh, by the by, while we're on this,
between paywalls and foreign languages,
but while you're looking it up, I am curious. So just running with the idea that it is for mercy killing. Okay, just letting Brooks figure this out. If we can't find it, then we'll have to say it's up in the air because neither of us know. But By the way, if you have evidence, if you have a statement that it's a mercy killing, Connor, I am interested in that as well. But leaving that aside,
I don't. I'm making an inference.
Okay, let's assume that's true. All right. What's your opinion on euthanasia?
I think in the correct circumstances, it's absolutely the right thing to do.
What if you consider, for example, someone with Down syndrome who's already out of the womb is going to live a life of suffering? It's going to be a burden on the state.
Hold on. That depends. That depends on literally if what you're saying is accurate, because there's plenty of fucking Down syndrome people who are
What
not
about
particularly
someone
high burdens.
What about someone with a chronic pain condition who's going to require a lot of medicine? Right?
Sure.
They're gonna spend every day of their life in intense discomfort.
Are they conscious? Do they want to die?
No, presumably not.
Okay, sure. Yeah. If there is a life that is exclusively suffering, then yes, that life should be ended.
So if someone is taken hostage and they are being brutalized, but they don't want to die, it is still the Israeli government's prerogative, in your judgment, morally, to just kill them anyways.
No, not necessarily. This isn't my policy. Like, so for instance, when you're talking about like individual choice, if there was a possibility of survival, like torture, I would want to be tortured, right? If there's a potential of rape, though, I think I would want to be killed. Now, the problem with getting abducted is that you don't know what's going to happen, right? But being somebody who is prior service, the whole thing that I basically, what I was told was use all your ammo and save the last bullet for yourself.
By the way,
and I
just very quickly, I need to say this for my chat. So just very quickly, I'm not saying people with Down syndrome are living in like misery or whatever. I'm saying from the perspective of an outside party.
You were trying to use it as a hypothetical.
Well, from an outside party's perspective, to be clear. Continue, please. Because there are people who advise I think and have.
I think there's a lot of I think there's a lot of happy Down syndrome people, so I wouldn't use that. Let's say there was somebody with like a development disorder where they literally had neurological issues and they couldn't move and they couldn't think and they were in constant pain and all that kind of stuff, then yeah, euthanasia is the correct way to go. Yep. So anyways, just answering your question about like torture and murder and all that kind of stuff. Frankly, I don't know how you live in the state of Israel and don't have a means of defense. That is fucking insane. The fact that they had like civilians living a block away from fucking Gaza and they didn't have personal firearms, that's fucking crazy.
Also, to be very fair, the idea of having anyone a block from Gaza should be a red flag as a thing. I don't know, don't do that. Like, just don't. That's bad. That's a stupid thing to do. It's this thing where we talk about like the whole right of return march that was happening, and everyone's like, oh, there's this no-go zone for like 300 meters. And it's like, but they built fucking houses right on the other side of the wall as if that's not the most vulnerable thing that's ever existed. And again, why not 24-hour guards? Like, they were sleeping, for fuck's sake. They were sleeping.
They probably did have some dickhead security guard who thought nothing was ever going to happen, and also they were probably just relying on statistics that it was never going to happen, and also the houses were probably super fucking cheap. So yeah, people live in fucked up and weird situations for all sorts of fucking reasons. So okay,
I found a primary source. I'm just slowly getting there. Specifically, what's important is the context around it. So what happened very particularly is there was the Jabril Agreement, and this pissed off a lot of people in the military. Because the Jabril Agreement was Israel trading 1,150 security prisoners in exchange for 3 soldiers. And this was deeply lopsided and super unpopular. But again, they decided that they wanted to have the soldiers live because it's
their people.
Right. So in response, the 3 Israeli officers of the area never wanted that type of deal to happen again. Explicitly is the specific thing. Now, there are knock-on effects, I'm sure. These guys never stated any of those in their papers. I'm trying to find the literal primary source. It's a big PDF, so it's going to take me a second. But it's the A.L. Weitzman, who's a fantastic sort of forensic anthropologist and historian who goes through a lot of these things. He goes through and sort of tells the story of how these things happened, how we sort of ended up with this weird thing of Gaza, how Israel changed the definitions of things to allow certain things. And again, there's reasons that you may justify in your head, but again, making the call to kill your own men in friendly fire feels like a very strange justifiable thing that is only done in things. I made my joke, it didn't land, but Starship Troopers is not a heroic film. It's a film about the power of fascism and war. And the way that you have to, it's better dead. And it's like, yeah, really? Like, this is the space we're in where it's like, it's better to make sure people are dead than possibly alive. And it's, I'm sure at that point,
this is hitting, I'm not.
We've been going for a long time,
me,
dude. If we want to, we can reconvene later. Like we can talk about more stuff like this.
Yeah, we can do it again. This is fun combo
we
for
can
me.
wrap it up, but I want to make this point before we go. Sue, I have lived a privileged but voluntarily fucked up life. I didn't need to do any of the shit that I needed to do. I did 4 years in the military. I did 4 years in law enforcement. I also worked through college. I've had all sorts of experiences. I have had enough experiences and I have met enough people who were in terrible situations that I know that there are things that are worse than death. And so physiologically, psychologically, whatever the fuck you want to do. So for me, when you're saying like it's shocking to my moral conscience that you
don't want to play this game with me.
Well, okay. Well, I'm not. So
you
maybe
don't want to play that game with me. You don't want to play that game with me.
Okay, so let's not play the game then. Let's make the point. So it's not shocking to your moral conscience, but you're saying that it would be better if we valued life over the potential torture that people would suffer. Yes. I don't agree with you.
Not necessarily. Genuinely, not necessarily. The idea of it being a policy, that's the part that disgusts me. If you and I, and we've talked, and I know you, and you're being dragged off by some fucking psychos, and I shoot you because we've talked, and I get tried for that, I'll take my fucking punishment. This is heat of the moment. You talked earlier, and this is one of the things I think I want to really come down on because the way you talk about things is incorrect in this sense. You talk about the absolute truth of the blossom, the death blossom.
Death blossom.
The nature of when you don't have info and you're in the moment and you're shooting and killing and you get people. I get that. I've talked to soldiers who've done that. It is a thing people live with, and it haunts the good ones, I guess I would say. Sadly enough, the shitty ones aren't haunted, but it haunts the good ones. I get it. That part, not really what we're talking about, because we're not talking about Israel sending in tons of soldiers who happen to be shot upon and return fire. We're talking about people who, from afar, are blowing up and killing people. This is not the same thing. Equating them isn't even the same thing. Playing the game where, these guys who are very far away are seeing their friends taken away. No, we saw videos. They're in trucks and they just decided to blow them up and kill them, not even knowing if the trucks were mostly hostages. Didn't give a fuck because the policy, the coldness of it. One of the things I've argued on Sunday's stream is if we get to the point where you allow vigilantism as a policy, I find that horrifying. But if I'm on a jury of a guy who beats the fucking guy to death who raped his daughter, I'm going to let the guy off because there's a difference between heat of the moment and policy. Policy is terrifying to me because it allows people to be cold, inhuman pieces of utter garbage. Soldiers stuck in the wrong place, even Israeli assholes stuck in the wrong place. It's the way life works. I think it's horrifying. It's just the way life works. But if it's your policy to encourage murder, I think you're awful, and I fight against you. Hamas as much as Israel.
But aren't we kind of basing this off of two things? One, we're basing it off of probably helicopter footage on October 7th in which they missile struck or gunned down trucks that were driving away, presumably with hostages. I'm assuming that's one of the pieces of evidence.
We have the audio of the guys talking.
And they say there might be hostages, and they just go, fuck it, do it.
Worst part, they were trading messages on WhatsApp because they didn't know who was doing what, and they had no intelligence between them. So they were in WhatsApp groups trading, I'll shoot this guy, you shoot that guy. Really?
Wait. In reference to the hostages?
Yeah. From the drones, the bombing trucks and shit.
Who they were shooting on October 7th. They were literally coordinating their targets with WhatsApp. If they're coordinating their targets with WhatsApp, Connor, they don't know who's a hostage and who's a militant in the truck.
There's no one above. You're used to good armies. And this is Sundays will shit on me.
Yeah, I was about to say, is this malevolence or is this incompetence? Because
there is a
horrifying
porous line between those.
Either way, I find it horrifying. And either way, it's a thing where you got to step back. Like, no matter what, you got to step back.
I'll put it this way: this is incompetence being papered over with routinized malevolence. This is they don't have the capacity to get the proper intel, but it's okay because we've got a blanket policy that doesn't need to worry about that. See, here's the upshot of all of this, Connor. If we followed your logic, not only is there no capacity whatsoever for Israel actually procedurally to make a decision that leads to anything but the total destruction of the Gazan people, they have no capacity to actually receive back their hostages because they've already assumed they're dead.
Oh, I mean, you work with the information you got. So if they have videos or
they've gotten some of their hostages back,
whatever. You say that, but again, if it was a dude in a firefight who was shooting and killing and he had an RPG and he was like, fuck, and he blew up a building and it killed hostages, I'd feel for that poor guy. I'd probably want him prosecuted, but I'd probably feel for him. But a guy who doesn't have to press the button, he is in no danger. He's not seeing anyone in any danger. They're fleeing. We have the pictures. They're not getting anyone above. This is not an American.
I gotta push back on this though. You don't. If you have Hamas militants who just crossed the border and they just murdered 1,000 people, it's safe to presume that they're going to kill more people in the future.
Even if we pretended for argument's sake that
2 hours later.
Yeah, we're talking hours later on October 7th. We're talking buildings being bombed now with the same level of imprecision half a year later.
Wait, hold on. I gotta go, but you guys need to walk this through me. You understand that they, like, on the 7th and 8th, they had like a days-long firefight, right?
Oh yeah, in a lot of places. Yeah.
Okay, so what I heard from you guys, which I'm not sure if I'm understanding correctly, is that there were a couple of drone pilots who had the ability to choose what targets they were going to missile, and they were sending, I'm going to take out this target, you take out that target. Yeah. And it's trucks or it's people. Do we know what they're hitting?
Oh, it's technicals, pickups, basically.
Okay, so if there are pickups that are in the firefight zone and they're driving away back to Gaza, why would you not presume that they were Hamas militants?
Because they had hostages.
Why would you presume? Vehicles. No, real quick. Why would you presume that their trucks are Hamas?
Why wouldn't you if they're going into Gaza?
Why wouldn't you if there's a group of people in a truck driving very, very quickly away from a lot of shit? Is it from one of the things you choose the wrong direction, you run as fast as you can, you get in a truck, you deserve to die because you went in the direction of Gaza because that's the direction you could, because there's only 3 fucking roads in this nightmare land that exists there? Like, all of these things. This is why
I trust people on the ground to make these decisions more than
there was no one on the ground making the decision. It was one guy.
I trust people with the cameras to make a contextual decision more than us.
But they weren't though. They were coordinating on WhatsApp. They didn't know what the targets were. That's why they were on. That's why they were on an alternative app.
Trucks fleeing south into Gaza. Are those the targets?
Are they Hamas gendered trucks? What's the logic here?
Yeah, kill them.
But how do you know, Connor? How have you established this?
Because
you're firing from the air. You don't see inside the truck. Did they have Hamas flags on them?
They were just in a firefight.
No, they weren't.
With Israeli troops.
This is hours later.
No, they didn't see them in a firefight.
There's days-long firefight.
But they're fleeing. But they're fleeing. 8 hours.
But Connor, they're acting like they tracked this truck. They didn't track this truck. They've been watching this truck for fucking 3 hours. This truck shows up and is driving.
Wait, sorry.
And again,
I don't necessarily want to litigate the details because I don't know if I have enough of the details from you to make it make sense. I'm hearing trucks fleeing south from the kibbutz towards Gaza.
Technically
Israeli drone pilots hit them with missiles. I'm saying, sure, go ahead.
Okay, but how have the people firing the missiles who are coordinating their targets on WhatsApp determined that the trucks are Hamas?
What if they're just a bunch of Palestinians who stole trucks?
Let's do process of elimination. Okay.
Do you think every person who went into Israel that day was Hamas?
I don't give a flying fuck.
Okay, cool.
Hold on. Let's do process of elimination here. So we have 3 or 4 kibbutz or 3 or 4 communities along the Israeli border where Hamas militants walked in and started butchering everyone. You probably have social media alight and in like all over the fucking radio that Hamas has broken into Israel and they're killing the fuck out of civilians. You have IDF forces and local security forces, hold on, who are responding to the scene and getting into gunfights with Hamas. And then you have light trucks driving from these kibbutz that are having firefights back into Gaza. And you are saying it is not safe to presume that these are militants who were likely engaged in hostilities minutes before.
It is definitely not safe to presume that a truck that you've only identified from the air by its course is a militant that you are correct to bomb.
Is that enough for you to have killed? Did you kill people like that in Iraq? Is that how it worked?
No,
did you see a truck going the wrong
pilot? So hold on.
I mean, even with a fucking pistol.
Let's do this.
The guy walking the wrong direction.
Hold on. I mean, depending on the direction, yes, I would kill someone if they were walking in the wrong direction in the right space. So hold on. So an Israeli citizen is jumping into a truck and then driving 60 miles an hour with 5 dudes in the bed towards Gaza. Is that probable? The answer is no.
Well, what if you got
IDF
hang on.
Security personnel going to do that?
But
no,
Connor,
that's also not probable.
But Connor, once again, you haven't established this. If you have people in the bed of a truck fleeing from a combat zone, civilians are going to do that. Or how about this? If you have Hamas agents who are the ones charged with taking back hostages, you might have trucks with some people in the back, right?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, and if I see AK-47s, that truck is getting lit up. Yeah.
With all of the Israelis.
Yes, with all of the people. I am not letting militants escape. Yeah, you're right.
Okay. Good to know.
You guys just like I don't understand how you would ever make a decision in a combat zone ever.
Well, because these people aren't.
You guys held it to your standard.
These people aren't making a decision in a combat zone. They're making a decision above a combat zone. They're not under fire. They're picking out trucks to launch missiles at.
Do you think that those human beings don't feel the pressure of making life and death decisions of bombing trucks?
No, that's what the policy is for. It takes away the tension. It means you can just do it.
Hold on. The policy that you submitted to me that was 2 captains talking a decade ago?
That's not. We heard their voices. They weren't freaked out.
Okay, number one, military. You're never. I will never.
They were laughing about it.
Hold on. In a criminal investigation or in a conversation, I am never going to make a judgment about somebody's mental headspace based off of their tone of voice.
I mean, laughing and joking about it.
If they're in the air, referring to the people they're shooting as bug splatters, I
is
think
this
I would.
WhatsApp messages or is this a voice call? What the fuck are we talking about?
Both. We got both. That's the fun part. It leaked. It all leaked. We got to see and listen.
Okay, and so do you have Apache helicopter pilots laughing about their targets? What the fuck are you talking about?
I think it would have been helicopters, right? It would have been helicopters.
I don't know the explicit drone setup or which one they're using.
Okay, so all of the troops were laughing as they were blowing up trucks, and they didn't feel any pressure or anxiety whatsoever.
Well, I think it was two.
Said the ones.
I think it was two. I think it was two. The recording we have is 2. I can't remember if it was in a helicopter or what, but it's been a while.
Helicopter.
It wasn't a helicopter.
Okay. You know what? How about instead of litigating this?
Yes.
It's late. I'm a little tired. I'm getting a little touchy. How about you send it to me? I'll watch it. I'll see if it's as fucked up as you say it is.
All right.
Okay. So how about this? Yeah. Yes. Sorry.
No, after you, please.
Okay. So what I was going to say, my chat, we got 40, 50 people. Hang out. I'll address your questions or concerns before we leave. And then President Sunday, thank you. I know that we haven't always been the best of friends. I appreciate you being willing to have 2 relatively civil conversations with me so far. Brooks, it was a pleasure meeting you. I know we don't agree, but
this is actually a fun conversation.
Well, as Sunday knows, I don't really agreeing is not a thing anyone does with me, so it's not.
Frankly, he's agreed with you more than he usually agrees with me tonight. So,
okay. Well, it's fun. I enjoy it. I hope the chats enjoy it. I wish you gentlemen a beautiful night and have fun.
Take care.
Always.
Don't kill Tupac Sant.